Always alerting, always tracking. This is Next Weather.
Always tracking, so true, because we're actually tracking the tropics. What's going on right now, Cindy?
This is January, isn't it?
Yeah, you are correct, but this can happen. And actually today, the National Hurricane Center has been watching this thing that we've been looking at now for a few hours today. Looks very impressive out here. This is a non-tropical low, but an invest as well. So the Hurricane Center is putting a track on this. It is not expected to develop into anything tropical. But why did it even develop? Well, it's sitting over very warm water, the Gulf Stream, right on top of it right now. So it's actually increased to 65-mile-per-hour winds. That was as of 7 o'clock this evening. But the computer modeling wants to take this thing north toward Canada. So Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, they're going to get the effects of this. This is not going to be any kind of impacts here in the United States. Kind of a rare event to see this in January. There's only been, this is since 1850, by the way, there's only been 6 tropical storms out in the Atlantic. 3 of them turned out to be hurricanes. None of them were major. But if this one were to get a name, we're already going into the 2023 hurricane names here. Arlene would be the name. And again, the Hurricane Center can always go back on this after the season, and they can go back and do the analysis on it. This is quite impressive. It does have convection thunderstorms around the center, so we're going to keep an eye on it for you. But by tomorrow, it'll be moving into cooler water, so no problem there.
Right now, we're taking a live look outside from our Hollywood beach cam. Another gorgeous beach day out there, but it is steamy.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, 86 is what we've hit so far. We hit 90 yesterday, so today we cooled back a little bit. Yeah, I know it's hot for early April, but it's so pretty outside. Hey, a little bit of news from the weather world today, and that is from the Hurricane Center. Now, what they do with each and every storm that occurs is they go back and they review it and they issue a report, usually the following year. And they just completed their report for Hurricane Ian, and the news is that it has been upgraded to a Category 5 briefly over water. All right, so it was still a Category 4 at landfall, so it did weaken a bit before it came ashore. Doesn't matter much. I mean, of course, it was a tremendously deadly and destructive hurricane. It's the third costliest weather-related disaster worldwide in history. But just to let you know, it does join a rare group of Category 5 hurricanes. It's the 39th Category 5 in the Atlantic Basin. Again, Cat 4 at landfall, but it has been upgraded to a Cat 5 while it was over water.
Now, if you're keeping track here, hurricane season, you've got April, May, June 1st, July, June 1st. So this year's outlook, fortunately, though, it's a little dialed back.
Okay, that's good to hear. Colorado State University just released their forecast. Jennifer, you know, as Holly said, it's a little below average.
Yes, and it has to do with the prediction that we are possibly going to go to El Nino. But the university predicts 13 named storms, 6 hurricanes, 2 major hurricanes of Category 3 or higher. So the Atlantic hurricane season officially begins in June, but early signs indicate there is larger than normal uncertainty with this particular season, all thanks to El Nino, as I just mentioned. A research scientist says there is considerable uncertainty as to how strong an El Nino would be if it does develop. It's important to note this is not the official NOAA tropical forecast, but Colorado State's forecast often parallels with NOAA's, and NOAA's will come out, I believe, later this month. And typically what they do is they do a range instead of just one number of storms. They tend to do a range. But yes, I know that we're now basically in a neutral, and so we're neither El Nino or La Nina, but because it looks like the forecast climatological models are showing El Nino coming later this summer, that tends to suppress activity in the Atlantic. But, and I learned this from a former National Hurricane Center meteorologist, Max Mayfield. A lot of people know him. He always told me, don't focus on those forecasts because all it takes is one.
Can you give us a quick breakdown of El Nino, too, for anyone not familiar?
Okay, so when there is El Nino pattern, what happens is we get these strong upper-level winds coming off the Pacific. The Pacific warms up more, too, and so it tends to bring us some wind shear. That's what we call wind shear. Wind shear is basically cuts any tropical storms or hurricanes that try to develop on the Atlantic side. So that's one reason why it could be below
I always
average.
think wet, 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 rain, rain, rain. You know, whenever you hear that. So, Jen, okay, thank you so much.
We'll continue to monitor the scene. I think things getting better for our tornado warned areas. But Mike and Dr. Nab, obviously the rain not making things any easier.
No, not at all. Alex, thanks for that. And certainly we know that hurricane season is going to be here before we know it. Our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Nab, is with us. A lot of the seasonal predictions came out last week. Also, the El Nino watch came out last week. All those things, you know, considering, what is your takeaway from all that and what the season may then hold?
Well, boy, we're hearing a lot of discussion out there. You know, I go around town, people talk to me, oh, I heard El Nino's coming. I heard it's going to be a quieter season. You know, that is where the discussion is trending, right? So I want to talk about, you know, is it really as good a news that El Nino's coming relative to hurricane season as people think? Now, yes, in general, El Nino tends to lessen hurricane activity on the Atlantic side. But let's look back at some of these years. And I went back and looked all the way back to 1950. And, you know, 2 points here. Number one is, not every El Nino year is created equal. Sometimes you have a weak El Nino, sometimes moderate, sometimes strong. And also, even if you have El Nino, doesn't mean you can't have one bad hurricane come through. So let's look a little bit at the history here. This is a map of all of the hurricanes that have struck the continental United States during El Nino years.
It's a lot.
Since 1950, and not only is it a lot, there are some nasty, notorious, big, bad hurricanes on this list, including Michael and Florence in 18, Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jean in 2004, and then go back to really notorious ones like Camille and Agnes. And you know, you have all the way up to Cat 5 making landfall in El Nino years.
Doesn't this give credence to that whole doesn't have to be a busy season to be a bad season? I mean, this graphic is truly proof of that. It may have been a lower than average number season, but you got the one that caused the problem.
Yeah, it really does only take one. Now, some folks will say, well, but okay, Camille and the 2004 storms, those were in weak El Nino years. Okay, fair point. So I'll take off the weak El Nino and we'll look at just the moderate and strong El Ninos. You're still left with Cat 4 Audrey hitting the Gulf of Mexico. You still have Agnes. You still have landfalling hurricanes. And even if you go to the rare, really strong El Ninos, you can't shut down the Gulf of Mexico, even in the strongest of El Nino years.
But the chances of that happening are probably pretty slim. Since we're at neutral right now, things would have to happen fast.
They would. They would. You know, it's possible. It's happened before. Audrey happened in a year like that. Audrey in 57 was after a triple dip La Nina, and then we went all the way to a strong El Nino. And in June, we got a Cat 4. So the point here is that, oh, and by the way, here's an honorable mention. A strong El Nino in 2015. No landfalling hurricanes in the U.S., but boy, did we get lucky because Joaquin was a Cat 4 that hit the Bahamas and sunk the Alfaro.
Right.
I mean, so if you think that the hurricane season is not a problem because we have El Nino, that's taking a big risk. Now, a lot of folks have said, Nab, why are you trying to pour cold water on our hope, right? But I want you to have legit hope that if you do get a storm during El Nino year, you've got the insurance, you've got the shutters, you've got everything you need in case it happens.
Important to do. And again, no one's ever said, I was too prepared.
I was over-prepared.
Yeah.
Oh, shame on me, right?
What an idiot.
So that's why the National Weather Service may not even know this is there unless I'm sure they're watching our feed, but you can't see this thing on radar because it's so small. So let me zoom in here and you can see a couple of those showers moving in between Hollywood and Fort Lauderdale, going right on top of Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood Airport. Notice you're not seeing those big, intense reds. We went through last week and we saw some of these funnel clouds move through. That's a very different environment. You got strong supercell thunderstorms moving through this area. Notice on radar, no lightning strikes popping up. These are just some generic downpours, but you get the ingredients to come together just right. Offshore, over that warm water, you get that little bit of spin. You don't have friction of trees or anything. It's just that flat water. You can easily get those waterspouts to develop, and it makes for an incredible sight if you're down there seeing something like this in person.
And Brandon, although it does seem to still be pretty far offshore, we're still monitoring it because, again, we're a bit surprised that it's lasting this long. But what would sort of be the ingredients that would allow this waterspout to move toward the shore?
Well, we have a little bit of wind shear in place. It goes along with the winds kind of upstairs. Here along the Florida coastline in this tropical air mass and all this moisture, we see hundreds of these waterspouts throughout the year. They come in different shapes and sizes. A lot of them come and go, and people don't even know they're there. But in a case like today, this is a pretty decent one that is getting a little close to the coastline. You see the radar there. These storms moving kind of from east to west, so they are getting a little bit closer to the coast. We could see these get pretty close to the coast, and it's not unheard of occasionally for some of these waterspouts to briefly move on shore. Once it hits the sand, that would actually be considered a tornado and can whip around those beach umbrellas. And we know how populated a Hollywood beach can get this time of the year. And let's go back to that full screen, because it looks like we're cutting off that funnel. It should be on the right side of the screen. That rain there in the background.
It looks like it's moving, Brandon. I mean, it's a little hard to tell, but it does seem to get closer and closer to the shore now that we're getting this vantage point.
And we don't know whether that's just the shift in perspective from Sky 10 versus sort of our eyes maybe deceiving us in terms of its curvature or anything else. I know you said maybe it's not getting closer, but is it moving at all here?
It's definitely looks like it's about within a mile, I'd say, of the coastline now. The shower activity is moving towards the coastline, so this waterspout would be moving along with it. And usually these things fizzle out when it gets to the coast, but I haven't seen much change in the structure of this since we came on with it. Yeah,
it's holding on strong, Brandon, and I have to say that one thing I notice as I'm looking at the shoreline here, again, this is just off of Hollywood Beach. I see plenty, at least even from this vantage point from Sky 10, I see lots of people on the beach. I could see some of the beach umbrellas, some of the beach chairs, the towels. Like, it's very evident to see that. So there are people on the beach right now, no doubt with their cell phones out, probably trying to get images of this, which is quite a sight to see. It's moving. It's definitely moving toward the shore. So I do hope those people there know you might want to get indoors now.
Yeah, don't stretch your time out there for too long if you can. But this is also a worthy opportunity to kind of remind people as we now zoom in.
Looks like they're getting away.
There's some
there's
moving
people
off
leaving.
to the Broadwalk.
Yeah, they're doing exactly what they should do. They've been watching this thing. They see it getting closer. And in this case, if it's coming right at you, it looks like it's not moving because it's moving in your
look
direction.
At this, Brandon.
There you go.
And it's getting close. Yeah, this one looks like it's going to move on shore.
It's going to make it on shore. I really, in the next few seconds here, let's watch
You mentioned also this is a tornado once it makes landfall here, touches the sand, correct?
Yeah, once this hits the sand, this would be a brief tornado. I'm curious. Look at the umbrellas already rolling down the beach. You see that?
Yeah, we see it. You said, whoa, look at that, just lifting it right up. So you said about 50-mile-per-hour winds we could be expecting from something like this?
You could easily see 50, 60, even higher, depending on the strength of it. That's right on top of the Broadwalk there.
It looks like someone almost just fell on the right side of your screen there.
Chairs getting whipped around.
Chairs.
It looks like, okay, it might be done from what we saw.
Well,
it might have finished.
This is a good moment to ask whether, like, what are the dynamics of a waterspout now that it is technically a tornado in the sense that it made contact with the sand, everything else. How long does it take to sort of dissipate from here on out?
Sometimes they can last a while. In this case, like I told you, it's not going to last long, and you can see it's already fizzled out. It hits the land, it's hitting these buildings, the winds get disrupted because there's more friction, and it already fizzled out. The funnel may still be above there, up by the clouds, but I don't see any circulation at the surface. That looks like Margaritaville. That's on the bottom, that big white building there.
It does look like.
So this is just north of Margaritaville, right in the middle of the Broadwalk.
Right in that busy Broadwalk we were talking about. And Brandon, what an example of how quickly the weather can change. We first spotted this several miles offshore. We weren't even sure if it was going to make it to shore because, like you said, we rarely see that. But it took about, what, 10 minutes for it to get to land. So what a sight to see that we were able to capture this from Sky 10. We have never been able to capture an actual waterspout making landfall in that way and see what it can do, even in those brief seconds, what it can do.
Yeah, you saw it didn't take long, and I think that's the biggest danger about these waterspouts. It's not so far inland near the buildings. It's right there on the beach with all those umbrellas. Imagine that big umbrella stick blowing around when you're sitting there on the beach. And it looked like most people had cleared out and trying to get a closer look.
Yeah,
like
a few on the right side of your screen are now making their way back out to the beach, it looks like there, and perhaps that one at the top, right where we see the truck, might have been the person a couple minutes ago that we saw fall down when it initially made landfall there. So hopefully that person's doing okay, but it looks like just based on general behavior, everyone seems to be back to quote unquote normal.
Right, to normal. And what a sight to see that we were able to capture live on Sky 10.
And actually, before we go to break real quick, let's go over to radar real quick. They just put a tornado warning out. I bet the National Weather Service is watching our feed right now, and they saw that this moved on shore. This tornado warning does include Hollywood Beach for that waterspout that moved on shore. This goes out until about 1:15. So this is a short-lived warning. It's less than about 30 minutes or so for these showers moving in. And like we saw from Sky 10, as soon as that circulation hit the beaches, caused a little bit of damage with the umbrellas and stuff blowing around. It got towards the buildings. This is just north of Margaritaville is actually where this moved onshore, right along the broad walk there, right along the A1A. The circulation fizzles out and we're looking okay. The rotation, and let me see if I can get over here on the radar and see if there's still any rotation with this thunderstorm. This was such a small funnel cloud, and if you're just joining us, we'll get the video and we'll run it back. You can see we were live on the air as this actually made landfall and technically turned into a tornado. What I'm looking for within this scope are any reds showing up. Reds and greens right next to each other would indicate some rotation. I don't see any of that. So I suspect they just put this tornado warning out because they were watching our chopper feed and they did see that, in fact, this waterspout did make landfall as a tornado just a few moments ago, live on the air, right at Hollywood Beach along the Broad Walk. And that's why this doesn't extend very far inland. This warning doesn't even go back towards Federal Highway. This is basically just for the Broad Walk there in Hollywood as that waterspout is moving onshore. And you can actually see this rain kind of intensify a little bit, and it's coming down pretty good. There's more storms out to the east too, and this is not the first waterspout we've seen during the day today. It's possible we could get one or two small waterspouts move in. I'm not concerned about severe weather across inland spots. That's the main threat with any of these storms that move through, is basically one of those brief waterspouts coming onshore and then breaking up as they move maybe a mile or so inland. Do we still have Sky 10 up? I'm curious to see if we're still seeing a funnel cloud or anything coming out of these clouds.
Brandon, while we try to get Sky 10 up for you, Brandon, something that you mentioned that is very interesting is that most likely they were watching our feed, and then that's when they sent out the tornado warning. And I think that's an important moment to note because last week we dealt with a couple of tornado warnings, but a lot of times when we get these warnings, more so than not, a tornado has either already touched down, because sometimes these warnings come so fast and it's very hard to catch these tornadoes, especially when they're coming offshore like that.
Yeah, and it's very rare for us to catch almost the entire evolution of this thing from when it started to when it made landfall as a tornado to where it is now, and that rotation is fizzled out. In fact, I was checking in with the National Weather Service now. As soon as that tornado warning came out, it's been out for what, maybe a few minutes?
Yes.
They already canceled it.
Right.
So it was a quick spin up offshore, moved along the beaches, threw around some beach chairs and umbrellas, some of the tables there at a restaurant that's on the Broad Walk, and it's already fizzled out. You just see that heavy rain falling there in the background. So we'll definitely keep an eye out for any more waterspouts that develop. That'll certainly be the case today, and we'll let you know if we see anything else on radar.
Well, and moving forward now, Brandon, I know you just mentioned that things are not looking serious for any inland developments in this regard, obviously.
This is not like last week where we saw those big supercell thunderstorms that were inland and they caused a lot of damage. These would be quick waterspouts with the potential to just briefly move on shore. Everything looks okay right now, but we'll keep an eye out on it.
All right, and with that, we're going to take a quick break.
Live, the one and only Local 10 News starts right now.
And we begin with the mess on Hollywood Beach, brought on by a waterspout. The swirl of trouble heading straight for beachgoers right there, but instead they were forced to run for cover.
And we captured the waterspout live on our air at noon today, and people are still spun out in surprise. Local 10's Rosh Lowe joins us live from Hollywood Beach with reaction. Rosh.
Local 10 was all over this, literally, and you don't see this every day. So I'm standing here on Hollywood Beach. Imagine being here. All of a sudden, you see this water spout, right? And then it gets closer and closer and closer and closer. So what do? You start to run. So let's get to our video right now, and I'll show you really incredible images. So we'll start out with the water spout, okay? It's offshore. People on the beach are looking at it, and they're thinking to themselves, you know what? These water spouts really don't last that long. It'll dissipate. And then it doesn't dissipate. It continues to just hover offshore. And so beachgoers say to themselves, you know what, maybe we should get out of here. And they're watching this and they're thinking, what's going on? Next thing you know, we'll get to our next piece of video. It gets really close. It comes on shore, becomes a tornado, and the people, they just start running, which you can see in the video. They just start making a run for it. One person falls, but while this was out there, while this was offshore, okay, people, because they've never seen anything quite like this, it's important to stress that most of the time, these waterspouts are gone in seconds. Not this. This was, you know, minutes, 10, 15 minutes. So what do? They take out their cell phones, and let's get to that video right now. And they just start filming, really, this very unusual incident. Now, keep in mind, the whole time, Sky 10 is over this, and we are as surprised as all of you were watching this. And we're following along, and we're watching this come on shore. So we have our meteorologist, Brandon Orr, and then we have people's reaction. Let's take a listen to both.
It's definitely moving toward the shore. So I do hope those people know you might want to get indoors now.
Yeah, don't stretch your time out there for too long if you can. But this is also a worthy opportunity to kind of remind people as we now zoom in.
Looks like they're getting away.
There's some
there's
moving
people
off
leaving.
to the Broadwalk.
Yeah, they're doing exactly what they should do. They've been watching this thing. They see it getting closer. And in this case, if it's coming right at you, it looks like it's not moving because it's moving in your direction.
Wow, look at this, Brandon.
There you go.
And it's getting close. Yeah, this one looks like it's going to move on shore.
It's going to make it on shore. I really, in the next few seconds here, let's watch
You mentioned also this is a tornado once it makes landfall here, touches the sand, correct?
Yeah, once this hits the sand, this would be a brief tornado. I'm curious. Look at the umbrellas already rolling down the beach. You see that?
Yeah, we see it. You said, whoa, look at that, just lifting it right up. So you said about 50-mile-per-hour winds we could be expecting from something like this?
You could easily see 50, 60, even higher, depending on the strength of it. That's right on top of the Broadwalk there.
It looks like someone almost just fell on the right side of your screen there.
Chairs getting whipped around.
Chairs.
It was coming down out of the cloud, and it stopped, and I started praying. Everybody went crazy. But it wasn't. I said, that's a water spout.
Okay, so that one woman started praying. For a moment, let's go back to that video that Brandon was talking about when it comes on shore. Let's go back to that for a moment, because you'll really get a good idea of what this was like for people, chairs being tossed around and people just beginning to run. Now, coming up tonight at 5 o'clock, you see this tiki bar? Bring it back out here live. You'll see this tiki bar right here. Well, the owner of the tiki bar, he was here. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, right? You couldn't believe what you were seeing. And all of a sudden, they take out their cell phones. They start, filming and getting video. We're going to bring you that video up at 5 o'clock, and we're also going to bring you a whole bunch of reaction. Okay, for now, I'm live on Hollywood Beach. Rosh Lowe, Local 10 News.
Quite a day for them. Thanks a lot to Rosh. Let's take a live look out of our Hollywood Beach tower cam right now, right behind Rosh Lowe. All's well that ends well. And take a look there. Pretty calm on this Friday afternoon.
Much calmer than it was at noon, Betty.
Not nearly as exciting. We actually had 2 waterspouts turn tornadoes. The other one came ashore just south of Boca Inlet. And the great thing about this situation, though we watched them evolve out over the waters, once that circulation came onto land, it didn't last very long. So we're thankful that that circulation dissipated pretty quickly. So now it's back to business as usual. No concerning showers and storms showing on the Doppler radar at this point. We are finding the balance of the heavier rainfall back out toward the Everglades and then up just south of Lake Okeechobee over interior Palm Beach County. If you look close enough, though, we are catching just a few spotty rains in portions of Miami-Dade, like this shower that has drifted from MIA southward down toward Coral Gables, and then another shower back out near Tropical Park or just southwest of. We'll keep an eye out on those waters just offshore. For now, nothing too concerning. Won't rule out a here or there shower rest of the afternoon.
The weather doesn't bring too many impacts because we are under that tornado watch until 2 o'clock. And you can see all of these areas under this big red box. That's that tornado watch. And we're watching all of these storms that are back out to our west that will eventually cross the Everglades, work work into our areas as we go towards the latter half of the morning and into our early afternoon. We've had a few light showers trying to work around the Homestead area right along US 1 north of Key Largo this morning. These are non-severe, but we will be watching the intensity go up, especially as we break to some of that sunshine through some of the clouds that are out there. But as we're turning on the radar sight out of Key West, we're really watching all of this action, because notice everything is moving from west to east. So when we're looking at this, we're watching for some of those more intense maybe waterspouts as they start to approach the coast, as they start to approach the Keys as well, because this is why we have those ongoing watches in place. So as we time everything out for you, zooming in a little bit more, we're going to take this forward in time. Notice by about 9 o'clock, we start to see them creeping across the Everglades, moving across Alligator Alley. Those storms continue to intensify through the second half of our morning, 10, 11 o'clock. By 12 o'clock, they're working around the Miami-Dade area and eventually pushing off. Now, by the time we get to that 1, 2, 3 o'clock time frame this afternoon, storms should be moving away and much nicer conditions will be taking over. But as we do continue to watch the improving conditions by the second half of our day today, we also have to keep in mind that we have a wind advisory in place. So before and after these storms come through, it's going to be very windy. So we could have gusts 30 to 40 miles per hour at times, and that's not even within the thunderstorms. Within the thunderstorms, those have their own risks associated with them. So checking out that 7-day forecast for you, we have to get through today, because today is when that cold front comes in. Then the humidity drops off and we ditch the rain chances through much of this week. Notice though, as the rain chances drop off, our temperatures soar back up near 90 degrees. So as we're heading towards the weekend, next weekend, we'll still have a chance for some stray showers, but it's all going to be about the heat and humidity next weekend. But for this weekend, we're watching that chance for strong wind, small hail, and of course that tornado threat that's embedded in some of these storms.
An EF2 tornado hit South Florida. Look at this, flipping a car. Watch it, boom, you see that right there? Literally picks it up, we'll slow-mo it, end over end. Wow. Now, this was Palm Beach Gardens on Saturday. This week should be a lot calmer for you, thank goodness. We had a ton of active weather here. That's a scary moment right there. Everyone's okay though. We're told. That's good news. But that just shows you how intense they can be for short periods of time, seconds, and then do their damage, and then they're done in some instances, right? All right, so I want to show you what happened here with that April 29th tornado. Ended up being an EF2 tornado with 130-mile-per-hour winds that came along with it, and that obviously was enough with those spinning updrafts in the vortex there to create a scene like that where the car was flipped. It was only on the ground for 2.6 miles, so it wasn't on the ground for very long, but it was very intense at the time it was on the ground here. That just kind of shows you each and every tornado has its own personality, right?
Cleanup continues today after a powerful tornado touched down in Palm Beach Gardens over the weekend.
The strong winds lifting cars, sending them flying into the air. Local 10's Joseph Ojo joins us from Palm Beach Gardens with a look at all the damage left behind.
And no matter where you look across Palm Beach Gardens, you will notice that the damage is extensive all over. Take a look at this. This looks like something exploded to make all of this come down. This was an international sculpture gallery, but now it is all completely reduced to rubble. A Monday morning cleanup in Palm Beach Gardens after an EF2 tornado rocked the area. Tree removal service companies could be seen out and about cutting hanging trees, and residents could be seen clearing debris from around their cars.
We get the phone and you get the alert. It's this tornado watch from 4 to 5:30. It's 5:15, and we're going, well, 5:15, nothing's gonna happen, and there you go, 5:30, and something is happening. I live here half a mile.
People like Emma Hay did not expect this kind of extensive damage.
It's surreal. You only see this in action movies. I've never seen this in real life.
Everything got really crazy, and all the electricity started flickering, and we booked it for the bathroom. But yeah, it happened really, really quickly.
In the Sanctuary Cove community, dozens of units are uninhabitable, windows shattered in homes and on outside cars, a trail of roofing material littering the ground, large dumpsters tossed around, and cars landing on top of one another after being tossed like toys. Our cameras even capturing large trees uprooted at the base, some which toppled over onto other vehicles. And not only were poles knocked onto cars here in Palm Beach Gardens and trees snapped at its roots, you could even see that fences here were completely wiped out, even wrapped around trees, and in the distance, you could even see a boat that is tossed on its side. Cell phone video capturing the storm cell that spawned the tornado just before 5 Saturday afternoon. Another video shows the wind flipping a car as debris spiraled into 130-mile-per-hour winds. The wind so strong it wiped out this international sculpture gallery. Crews seen using cranes to clear the damage left behind.
All the trees are just knocked over, and it's just going to be totally different now.
We feel very blessed that we were spared from this catastrophe.
So at this time, crews here in Palm Beach Gardens continue to clean up at this time. Thankfully, in all of this, we are told that there were no reported injuries or deaths. We're here in Palm Beach Gardens. I'm Joseph Ojo, Local 10 News.
Joseph, thank you so much for that. Well, what a difference a couple days makes, because boy, do we have beautiful weather outside right now, Luke.
I'm loving the changes.
I think we all are. This is nice to get away from that nasty weather spell that we'd had much of April, but it's gone now, everybody. There's the storm system unwinding, but still spinning up around the Great Lakes. You see the blue on the maps? Yeah, it's snowing up in parts of Wisconsin today. But what we have, dry air, clear air, there's nothing going on weather-wise, which is such a change from what we had just last week and over the weekend. 85 degrees right now. Feels like 84. Humidity is really, really low. I'm loving that. 37% relative humidity. Oh, that is tough to top in May in South Florida. Nice evening ahead. Get out, enjoy this. We'll be in the 70s in no time and completely dry tonight.
A South Florida man experiencing tornado terror. A driver recording this moment. A car lifted off the ground and tossed by a twister that touched down in Palm Beach Gardens Saturday. The man inside says he is lucky to survive.
When the car started to flip, I do remember kind of like a flash of seeing the airbag go off and the glass break. But then, we were back upright and I was just sitting there with my hands on the wheel. And it seemed to happen basically instantaneously. Storm obviously was, had serious force, and, I'm lucky, my dog's lucky, everybody's lucky that, everybody walked away unscathed.
The powerful tornado left cars stacked like cards. It damaged homes, buildings, and boats, and down to trees and power lines.
Hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin is less than 1 month away, and back now with us is our expert, Dr. Rick Knabb. Talk a little bit more about your top 5 list, Dr. Knabb, of top 5 locations overdue for a hurricane.
Yeah, and I'm talking about being overdue for a direct major hurricane strike. And the first one on the list, our number 5, is Houston. Now, you might be thinking, Knabb, I don't agree with that. Well, if you don't like it...
Harvey wasn't that long ago.
No, it wasn't. But when I was at the awareness tour stop in Houston the other day, the meteorologist in charge there said, Knabb, we are so overdue for a major hurricane. I said, I know it, and we got to talk about that. Now, Harvey was a tropical storm flood disaster for Houston. It was not a major hurricane. When it went through farther to the south, it made landfall as a Cat 4, but in Houston, it was a tropical storm. So this was not a major hurricane wind event for Houston. And then you think back to Ike. Well, didn't Ike clobber Galveston and Houston? Well, Ike was a Cat 2, and most of its winds did not have a huge impact on Metro Houston. And then Rita and Laura missed off to the east. We've been lucky since Alicia 83.
We've had some really serious disasters there,
We have. But
so you're looking, do you think that they're overdue for a serious wind event in Houston?
That is the key. They not like, like South Florida, they don't have the shutters and people don't get the plywood. If a major hurricane goes into Houston, they are not as well prepared for a major wind event as, say, South Florida.
And it's a large, sprawling metropolitan area, so there's a lot of people in large area at risk.
Yeah. Now, nearby is my number 4 city, and that's Corpus Christi, Texas. And you might be thinking, well, Harvey, now that hit Corpus, didn't it? Well, the center passed just to their north. Corpus Christi was spared a major wind event, and they were spared a major storm surge event, and they have had other, major hits in the past, but that was before their population went way up. They're extremely storm surge vulnerable, Mike.
So what are you showing us here on this map then?
These are some of the storms that came nearby, but again, Harvey did not give them a direct hit. Allen went to their south. Dolly went to the south. You have to go back to the 50s and 60s when they got major direct hits. It's been a long time.
Then.
Yes. All right, number 3. Let's go number 3 on the list, and this is Fort Lauderdale. Now, again, you might be thinking Fort Lauderdale is a very hurricane vulnerable area, but Wilma was Cat 2 when it went over and it made landfall in the southwest. We had Katrina as a Cat 1 nearby. We had other near misses, and we had the recent flood event. but we haven't had a direct major hurricane landfall on the Broward County coast since 1950 with Hurricane King. It has been a long time.
That would just be sheer luck, wouldn't it? Because that east coast of Florida is so vulnerable.
Yep. Well, you go back to the 1940s, look at how South Florida was rocking and rolling. If we go back to this, it's going to be bad in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. All right, we got a couple more.
Huge population.
Yes, absolutely. A couple other big metro areas that haven't been hit in a while. The Tampa Bay area. It has been over 100 years since a major hurricane strike in Tampa. We've had some near misses. We've had some impacts. Ada in 2020 was a hurricane nearby. We've had some impacts from Irma. Charlie and Ian gave us some scares. But Tampa is way overdue. If we have another 1921 hurricane with so many more people in this area, it's going to be bad.
Number one on your list, Dr. Nab.
This is the Georgia coastline, and we could throw the Jacksonville, Florida metro into this. This is an area that has really gone a really long time without a major hurricane strike. Yes, you've had Dorian and Matthew and Ian go nearby, but let's go quickly to look at what the map looked like for Georgia in the late 1800s. There's some recent close calls. This is what happened in the 1800s. This could happen again. You got to get ready.
Always possible. Dr. Nab, thanks.
Okay, taking a look outside. The temperatures are rising, and it looks good now, but we got to watch out for poor Mother's Day.
I know, it might be a little bit rainy on Mom.
Yeah, we'll have a couple of showers in the mix, but we'll have plenty of dry time too. So I say keep your outdoor plans for Mother's Day. I think it'll turn out okay. We'll just have a few more showers than what we've been used to. At least we're not talking about hurricane season quite yet, but I did want to give you a notice from the Hurricane Center. They did some post-analysis on this storm that was off the East Coast. This was back in January, so I had to go way back to get this satellite image. And they found that this was actually a subtropical storm. So this goes down as officially, as of yesterday, the first storm of the 2023 season, just north of Bermuda, way back in January. You can see it almost has a decent swirl, almost an eye-like feature there. So what this means for the rest of the season is the next tropical depression will be named Tropical Depression 2. This one in January will go down as the first storm of the season. The next tropical storm will still be named Arlene. This one will just go without a name. So we'll still start with that A letter name. I'm looking out into the tropics and I'm not seeing anything out there right now. So nice and quiet. We still have 20 days left until the start of hurricane season, so we'll start with Arlene, then go to Bret, Cindy, Don, Emily, Franklin, and the list goes on and on. So plenty of time to enjoy some nice weather like this evening. Not too bad.
Just 17 days away from the start of the 2023 hurricane season, and today is actually the start of the Eastern Pacific hurricane season. But will this be an active season or a relatively quiet one? Well, El Nino may have a thing to say about that.
It's the #1 question I get. What kind of hurricane season are we going to have? So we're going to bring in storm specialist Dr. Greg Postel to talk more about what El Nino means for this year as we head into the hurricane season. And are we actually in El Nino yet? We need to talk about that.
It feels like we are. Technically not yet, but we're on the threshold. We're kind of in this El Nino watch phase where we're likely to get into El Nino during this hurricane season in the coming months. But the other thing is, too, is it's like you can have a very busy season, and if all the systems are way out to sea, nobody knows really much about their impacts, right? And it can be a busy season with no financial or personal cost. The other way around can happen, too. You can have only one.
Just takes one.
It just takes one.
No matter the what type of season it is, one.
Only one.
One. So we got to be equally prepared. All right.
Exactly.
But we still want to talk about it.
We do want to talk about it because it is important. Where do we stand now?
Well, let's have a look, because we've got now the tropical outlooks that are issued to 7 days, which is a couple of extra days.
Yeah, that's a big change for this year.
Right, and that's nice. And although they don't officially start on the Atlantic side until, well, June 1st, we now, as of May 15th, are specifically looking at the Pacific side of things because, you know, we've seen in recent years activity start to boil up in mid-May.
Yeah, both in the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic, quite honestly.
And the Atlantic. But let's have a look at what's going on here now.
Yeah, so nothing imminent right now, but things look interesting.
Yeah, they do. We've got a whole lot of thunderstorms over some extremely warm water. You can see the numbers out there. It's way above 80 degrees in many cases and much above average. And that matters locally. I mean, maybe this is a harbinger for a very active season in this part of the world, but it's also a sign of something much larger that's ongoing in the Pacific.
When we think of El Nino, we think of warm water in the Pacific.
Right. That's exactly what it is. And
You got it.
We have it, right?
Yeah.
So El Nino is sort of the leading climate pattern of variation of water temperatures and wind patterns in the Pacific Ocean. And that has consequences globally. We'll get to that in a second. But let's just talk about what it means when we're in El Nino, which is a place where we're seeing much warmer than average water temperatures in the Pacific. This is a complicated graphic, but look at the numbers. JJA, JAS, all those letters on the bottom refer to the season. So JAS, July, August, September. Those are the probabilities that will be in El Nino, and that means that during the heart of the hurricane season on the Atlantic side, we will very likely, almost certainly, be in an El Nino.
And we've no doubt seen those probabilities go up here over the last several weeks.
Yes, and it's important to know whether or not we're going to be in an El Nino because there are physical reasons why those changes in the Pacific matter for the Atlantic.
Yeah, so why do we care so much that
Why
we're
do
in
we care?
El Nino?
Exactly. Above water temperatures, ocean water temperatures in the Pacific corresponding to El Nino does change the atmospheric wind patterns locally, but also very importantly, it changes the patterns of thunderstorms. In the Pacific, thunderstorms are very tall. The tops of them begin to influence the jet stream, and over time, not in 1 week or even, a couple. Over the season, the jet stream begins to get altered. So you see where it says stronger winds aloft over the Atlantic? That's associated with El Nino patterns of water and thunderstorms over the Pacific, which is why El Nino tends to reduce the number of tropical cyclones in the Atlantic, but it's not a perfect correlation, of course.
Right, absolutely. One year could be a little different than the other, but yeah, it's all about those strong winds because these developing cyclones don't like those strong upper level winds.
Yeah, and last graphic to show you sort of a matter of fact, this is the number of major hurricanes that we've seen going back since 1950 in the Atlantic Basin. That's a lot of graphic data on there. Breaking it out between La Nina, neutral, and El Nino, well, if you look at El Nino years, we have seen a dramatic reduction in the number of major hurricanes over the Atlantic. So it does kind of matter to some extent.
It's not the only factor, which is why, the forecast outlooks are for a smidge below average, but maybe not much more than that.
We'll talk about that next time, the other factors as well.
New at noon, here we go. The 2023 hurricane season outlook has been released. Meteorologist Erica Delgado is live in the Weather Center to break it all down. Hey, Erica.
That's right, Vanessa. And after 3 very active hurricane seasons with La Nina present, NOAA is predicting that El Nino will return for this upcoming season later on in the summer, which could bring their forecast together. So they're calling for 40% probability of a near normal season. They're calling for 12 to 17 named storms. The average tends to be a little closer to 14. Of those, 5 to 9 could become hurricanes. And of those 5 to 9, 1 to 4 of those could become major hurricanes with winds of over 111 miles per hour. The average is 3. So some factors is how they put this forecast together. So unfavorable factors, as I just mentioned, would be higher wind shear, likely caused from El Nino developing later in the summer, but it could be offset by favorable factors over the Atlantic. We're talking warmer waters so far this year, and they're saying more tropical waves could be coming off of Africa. Of course, this is how we can explain it so you understand a little better. You're looking at the Pacific Ocean, and those red arrows are upper level winds, right? Those are the ones that normally steer our thunderstorms. Well, those strong winds move into portions of the Atlantic and into the Caribbean. And when we talk about high wind shear, I'm sure you've heard us say that so many times, it tends to cut down the tops of thunderstorms as they develop. We'll have to see exactly how it all plays out. But of course, we're exactly 1 week away from the official start of hurricane season, and the National Hurricane Center is already eyeing this area of low pressure that could likely form within that yellow shaded area as we work our way into the upcoming weekend. Development is not likely with this one. They're keeping it very low for now, but it could cause deteriorating marine conditions, high surf, rough seas, dangerous rip currents all along the Carolina coastline through the southeast and up and down the east coast of Florida. Of course, we'll keep a close eye on that one. We're dealing with our own storms locally right now, and you can see the general flow once again from southwest to northeast. So we are calling for a busy afternoon here in South Florida. Closer look at our local storms that's coming up in just a few minutes.
Well, it's going to be a long road to recovery for the island of Guam after Typhoon Mawar battered the island this week. We showed you some of the scenes yesterday. Here you're getting a look at some more water filling the airport. And really just getting around the island is slowed by long lines at gas stations to refill, and then down trees everywhere. Power outages abound. In fact, most of the island is still without power, and it's going to take some time. Dr. Knapp, not a surprise when you look at what an absolute beast this storm was and now really is.
Yeah, when they are very intense and very large, it's a scary sight. It's just a good thing that since Guam, as it has really gotten larger and gotten even more intense, that it has not been directly affecting any land areas, but it certainly is an impressive sight on the satellite imagery. Now, based completely on satellite intensity estimates, no aircraft recon out in the Western Pacific. Out here over the Philippine Sea, here's Guam, there's the Philippines. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center, the U.S. Forecast for military interests out there, has the estimated intensity of 165 miles an hour, still a Cat 5 equivalent, moving west-northwest at 17. So at least it's been moving away from Guam and the Mariana Islands, but it is still a very, very large system. So if this was impacting land, the impacts from wind and from storm surge would be tremendous. And what is remarkable is how well put together the system has been since it went through that structural change as it was going over and leaving Guam. It's got concentric eye walls, but they've mostly been staying intact with that very large eye. And gradually, as it approaches cooler sea surface temperatures and a less favorable environment, we will get weakening. The other problem, though, is that it's probably going to slow down. Now, the good news is it might slow down so much that it doesn't actually reach the northern Philippines or Taiwan with direct impacts from the heavy rainfall that would result from even a equivalent Cat 1 kind of system. But it still could, with outer bands, affect some of those mountainous areas. And then Cadena Air Base farther to the north for U.S. interest would be a concern later on. So, Alex, if all this rainfall mostly falls over water, that will lessen the flood risk.
Have some breaking news for you. We got a severe thunderstorm warning once again in Miami-Dade County here in South Florida. So a really active afternoon again shaping up, not just for Florida, but also into parts of the southeast. Now, coastal sections of North and South Carolina, you're not going to see the severe weather like Florida, but unfortunately, rain beginning to make its presence felt. Here's that severe warned storm really right over the radar. So if you're wondering what this is, that big donut in the middle, that's the actual radar site. You can see this is kicking out some winds away from it and actually being picked up by the radar. So gusty winds coming out of this storm. Watching for a possible tornado. Now, the National Weather Service does keep that tag in there. So it's not a tornado warning, but I would treat it like this. This isn't the time to leave the house and get in the car. Unfortunately, yesterday we had that quick tornado, and that left a tractor trailer flipped on its side and unfortunately injured the driver. So again, given the proximity to the radar, I know sometimes it looks awfully murky and you're like, huh? But we've got those winds moving off towards the north and east. Again, winds moving from the to the south and west as well. East Perrine, Howard, Palmetto Bay, Green Mar Acres, and Kings Bay. The overall storm motion is off in this direction, so you get a little bit of enhancement with the storm moving north and east and then those northeast winds, so a little extra nudge to that. But again, tornado possible. I'd be most concerned about those areas that I just mentioned. The hammocks, the rain is coming down in buckets. It's really tough to see across these areas. And as Dr. Knapp mentioned, you're getting incessant lightning strikes over the same areas because the storm is not moving quickly. That means, unfortunately, we've got big problems in the danger of just walking to and from your car. So it's not an issue of getting drenched. It's an issue of maybe getting struck by lightning. Miami, I believe, under a ground stop. We've got delays at Orlando Airport. 2 o'clock, the expiration time on this warning. Of course, we'll continue to watch this, but lots of problems across Florida once again. Dr. Knapp, we know anytime we talk about Florida this time of year, we also have to start thinking about hurricanes.
Yes, it is definitely the rainy season now in South Florida, and we are now less than a week from the official start of hurricane season. But the system that we've got over Florida and affecting the southeast this weekend, kind of a preseason taste of what's going on. Upper level troughing is producing the unsettled weather that we've got over Florida, adding to the instability. And we've got a broad surface low, but it's attached to a bunch of fronts, so it's a non-tropical low. So why is the Hurricane Center mentioning it? Because we already have the low. This is not 10% chance that we're going to get a low pressure system to develop. It's a 10% chance that it takes on enough tropical characteristics to either be a subtropical hybrid or a tropical cyclone. But right now, it's got fronts attached to it, so it's not even subtropical. never mind not tropical. But this is the area the low will be moving in and has a slight chance of shedding those fronts and becoming more tropical. So let's take a look at those types of systems. A tropical system is fueled by the heat and the moisture from the warm ocean water. It doesn't have much in the way of temperature contrast going on. Now, a subtropical system is a hybrid. It is feeding off the warm waters, but also it's feeding off of the non-tropical temperature contrast in the atmosphere, but it does not have warm and cold fronts attached to it. The system that's off the southeast coast today does have cold fronts attached to it. It is a frontal system, and it looks more like this, where it is really tapping into the temperature contrast in the atmosphere that are happening all the way down to the surface. Now, this is the zone here off the southeast coast where we've had a lot of subtropical systems in the last several years. So this is the kind of setup that we often see, but the big difference right now is while there are some warm waters there with the Gulf Stream that are warmer than average, we have this cold front from the Canadian low that's attached into our low down here to the south. But, Alex, just because it's a frontal system doesn't mean it's not going to have impacts like a tropical storm would, with the winds, the heavy rainfall, the rip currents, the high surf, all of that. So treat it like a tropical storm, even though the temperatures will be below average.
Well, actually, today's going to be okay. I think we'll hold the rain really to tomorrow, but it's tricky with this coastal low. It's 5:30 the hour right now as Weekend Recharge is rolling on. I'm Paul Goodlow.
And I'm Lynette Charles. We have a lot of people headed to the beach for some Memorial Day fun in the sun, but of course we have a party crasher.
Yeah, and that's this low, which looks like a hurricane, but it's not. But it's definitely a coastal low, well-formed low, and that has been bringing what we've been talking about, weather, including this, flooding here to the Carolinas. This is Pamlico County, North Carolina. We had flooding, knock a boat loose. People tried to take the boats out despite the flooding, and this is really just that persistent wind, Lynette, kind of causing some of this coastal flooding. The wind pushing the water in some of the sounds and bay areas, and even flooding some local streets as well.
Exactly. So we had that rain and the wind, and boy, did that rain really add up over the past 48 hours here. So let's take a look at some of it. Look at this. Denmark, Georgia, over 4 inches of rain, close to 4 in Bloomingdale, Georgia, and then down off towards Tybee Island, close to 3 inches of rain, 2.92 to be exact. So yeah, so lots of rain adding up over the past 2 days, and we still have a little bit of rain in some of these spots as well. We have more in some inland areas. Look at this. Now trying to head over towards Louisville, Bristol getting in on this as well. At Hatteras, you're dealing with some thunderstorms. Look at all that lightning across the area. So not the best beach day at all. This is yesterday. There were areas that had some rain across it at the beach, and you had some people out there. But now you're talking about lightning, and you need to be indoors. So please do not be outside around this area. So we're going to continue to monitor this area, and there it is right there. Paul and I were talking about that this morning, that this kind of looks like a hurricane at this point, but it's not a hurricane. We are watching for plenty of clouds. We do have plenty of rain wrapping around these spokes really far up in around Charleston, Virginia at this point. And we're also going to watch this again around Myrtle Beach, causing some problems, still going downhill there. And then we can see what's going on towards Kingston. You have a little bit of a break, but a little bit of light rain coming in. We could see a spoke in a matter of moments for you as well. We timed this out for this Sunday, and Raleigh, you'll be in the thick of things. You can see some heavier rain. I'd say it's still light, but more steady. In fact, around 7 o'clock this evening, we're seeing this around Roanoke as well. Lexington, Charleston, you're still in on this. And then we look at D.C. So D.C., you may just be on the border there. But again, I think that you may see some showers before it's all said and done today. We will continue to watch that, Paul. But by your Monday, that's when D.C., Maryland, and the Delmarva, they're going to be on the thick of things. So it is going to be really just a bad beach day on Memorial Day.
Yeah, let's hope that concert, though, goes off dry tonight in D.C., honoring the people, our fallen veterans here in the U.S.
And it looks like we are right around the corner from the hurricane season. We're looking at tracking the tropics. We are seeing 2 days remaining until the start of the Atlantic hurricane season, and we do have a little activity that's out there, actually. In fact, taking a look at this area that we have, including pretty much the entire state of Florida, about a 10% chance over the next 2 days of some type of formation. And it's pretty low, and over the next 7 days, only a 20% chance. It's a disorganized cluster of storms wrapping around around a wide and broad area of low pressure that's going to continue to track over towards Florida over the next couple of days. So we're going to see an increased chance for rain from this system. And it looks like because we are pegged with this and the ocean temperatures are pretty warm out there, there is above normal water that it can work with and kind of gather a little bit of steam. But right now it would be running into a little bit of cooler water right off the coast compared to what it's over now. So if we look at the timing of this, this is the European model here, looking at all the moisture that's ahead of this. This is looking at Thursday, 10 a.m. As we get into later this week towards Friday, we start getting into some of the heavier showers across the area through the afternoon, evening rush hour as that low kind of slows down out there for a little bit. Then we get some decent rainfall by Saturday morning, afternoon, and then it makes its way tracking across the state. Most of the heaviest precipitation will start to move across to the east, and it looks like we'll see some breaks in those clouds and precip as we get into the weekend.
Story this morning, the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season starts tomorrow. Many hoping Mother Nature will be kind to Florida after the devastation last year.
But several factors are coming into play, which could make forecasting even harder this year. Tomorrow marks the official start of hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicting 12 to 17 named storms, with 5 to 9 becoming hurricanes and 1 to 4 that could become devastating storms.
It's definitely kind of a rare setup for this year, and that's why our probabilities are not 60 or 70%. They are a little bit to reflect that uncertainty.
Experts say keep in mind these are just predictions. There's a chance the season could be quieter or more intense.
So you have these two big factors at play, one trying to drive it to a very quiet season, the other trying to bring it to a very busy season.
First, there's this year's El Niño, which would normally calm the waters of the Atlantic. Still, the waters are unusually warm, which makes for ripe conditions for stronger hurricanes.
Normally, a much warmer than normal Atlantic leads to a well above normal Atlantic hurricane season.
The 2022 Atlantic season had 14 named storms, with 2 major hurricanes, Fiona and Ian. Those caused billions of dollars in damage and killed dozens. Both of those names were retired. This year, the list will start with Arlene and Bret. The 2023 season runs until the end of November. And remember, your storm station has you covered as you prepare for hurricane season. Our special Surviving a Storm airs this Sunday, June 4th at 7 p.m. right here on 7.
Now, 7 weather with meteorologist Vivian Gonzalez.
And as hurricane season starts tomorrow officially, we are watching an area in the tropics, and it's an area of low pressure, broad area of low pressure located in the Gulf, producing disorganized shower, thunderstorm activity. In fact, we have a lot of moisture streaming into the state of Florida. But regardless of development, because the hurricane center is giving it a low chance to form either in the Gulf or in the Atlantic, over the next couple of days, we're going to be in for a stormy stretch. And we do have some strong upper level winds, the southern branch of the jet stream over that area of disturbed weather, keeping it in check from organizing it, but also moving it slowly toward the state of Florida.
And there's just one day to go until hurricane season, so the National Hurricane Center has a message for everyone. Prepare now before it's too late.
NOAA's predicting a near normal hurricane season, but you got to remember even last year was near normal, but yet it was a very impactful season with Hurricane Ian and Nicole both striking the United States. So we got to be prepared each and every hurricane season. Just know that it only takes one to hit our area for it to be a bad hurricane season. So again, do your part this hurricane season.
And you pointed out that knowing if you are in an evacuation zone key, because that's going to help you decide. And again, it saves you the stress of having to figure it out when the storm is approaching.
Yeah, but if you live in an evacuation zone, you probably know you need flood insurance, and you also know you need to plan for your supplies a little differently because you're going to have to take stuff with you when you evacuate. Planning ahead is so important.
And, even after the storm, we talked about how that provides also more dangers. I think people think the storm passes and everything's good. When we look at hurricane deaths, the vast majority of these from flooding, both inland and storm surge flooding.
Yeah, water still takes by far way more lives than wind does. Yeah. And when you think about that, well, does that mean that even something that is not as strong of a hurricane not as high up the wind scale, can it still produce a lot of fatalities? And the answer is a resounding unfortunate yes.
Absolutely. Actually, when you look at the storm surge, obviously flooding and storm surge combined takes up the majority, but it is the flooding and again the after the storm that causes a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Wind, I think what people fear the most, because that's of course what gets us our category, only accounting for about 12% of all fatalities.
We really do all need to learn to be a little more afraid of water and respect what it can do and prepare accordingly.
Absolutely. No, we've got hurricane season coming one day from now, so worth mentioning. Yesterday we talked about Category 2 hurricanes that were still bringing some significant effects. There are some Cat 1 hurricanes that have done the same thing. So yet another reason why we can't get caught up on the category, but rather the storm.
Yeah, because there are other numbers and other characteristics of a hurricane when it's Cat 1 that should set off alarm bells. Like, what if it's only moving 1, 2, or 3 miles an hour? What if it is really, really large?
Yeah.
Or what if it's a little bit of both?
Well, absolutely.
And a Cat 1 hurricane is all of a sudden a lot scarier than it otherwise would be.
And we've seen some very recent examples of just that. You know, you talk to folks in eastern North Carolina, they remember Florence, just a Cat 1. So as we look at some of the hurricane landfalls, you've picked out a few that were very impactful despite the fact that they were a lower end category.
Yeah, and when you look at the 25 most expensive hurricanes in U.S. history, 5 of them are Category 1s. And there's also some tropical storms on there. So you don't have to be a major hurricane to have a major impact. So let's go from 5 to 1, the most expensive Cat 1 hurricanes. Matthew 2016, Alex, you remember this one as it passed just offshore. It was a really significant major hurricane threat, but it was a Cat 1 landfall. And even though it made landfall as a Cat 1, the impacts along the coast were devastating.
Yeah, huge damage where I was in Daytona Beach, and then what we saw in North Carolina. And again, going back to the deaths, the flooding was truly one of the biggest calling cards from this storm.
It worked with a frontal boundary and did something similar to Floyd. So again, a big example of Cat 1 that was really bad. Now, Agnes in 1972, the 4th most expensive Cat 1 landfall in the continental U.S., that happened in June. And the story with Agnes was mostly written by what it did after it made landfall in the Florida Panhandle, Big Bend area. It went up to your neck of the woods up in the mid-Atlantic and Northeast.
Yeah, folks across the Northeast still talk about Agnes and the flooding footprint that one left. I mentioned Florence. There are 2 other storms, though, that also had huge impacts for communities, including Irene and, of course, the big one.
Yeah, and these are all East Coast systems. Irene went just off the East Coast and made landfall as a Cat 1, but as a tropical storm produced that flooding disaster in Vermont. Florence was a major hurricane crossing the entire Atlantic, but it weakened beforehand. Remember, everybody's letting their guard down because Florence weakened.
Oh, good, it's a weak storm. Now we don't have anything to worry about. Obviously learned the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, and Florence's problem was that it wouldn't hardly move. And then Sandy's problem was that it was immense in horizontal size. So when Cat 1s are slow, large, or both, you get big time disasters. Did you know how expensive all these Cat 1s were?
No, I think when people look at the numbers and of course, put a name to it, they go, oh gosh, that was a terrible storm. So really important to not get caught up on that. Dr. Nab, thanks. And coming up, our coverage continues. Storm Center kicks off at 5.
A weather alert off the top at 11 tonight. A huge mass of moisture heading our way, putting South Florida under a flood watch until Friday. And get ready for several more days of downpours.
And with all this rain comes the threat of possible flooding. Chief Meteorologist Phil Farrow in the Weather Center with some details. Phil.
And you mentioned it, all this rain. Take a look at some of the rainfall totals from today. Plantation, 4 3/4 inches of rain. Weston, almost 3 1/2. Under 2 in Margate and Biscayne Boulevard near Northeast 73rd Street. Wilton Manors and Pompano Beach, all over 1 inch of rain. Right now, the storm tracker is detecting more rainfall moving in, especially across the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, along the Florida Keys and Biscayne Bay. We have quite the downpours here, especially there along Marathon, US 1, all the way through Isla Morada. Heavy rain, gusty winds, plenty of lightning. If all this hangs on, we will probably see some more of that moving in across Miami-Dade and then eventually Broward County overnight, with a better chance of rain tomorrow. Because the ground is already saturated from recent rainfall, any additional downpours will lead to some street flooding. Because of that, there's a flood watch in place for Dade and Broward all the way through Friday night. Now, as far as the cause of this big mess, area of low pressure in the Gulf of Mexico, it is now being followed as an invest 91L, invest for an area that the National Hurricane Center is investigating further. 91 is a tracking number, and L stands for Atlantic Basin. So the National Hurricane Center is giving it a 20% chance that it could develop in the area highlighted in yellow over the next 7 days. A Hurricane Hunter mission is set for tomorrow. So it looks like that low is just going to hang around the Gulf of Mexico during the day tomorrow, pushing more moisture our way. By Friday, more of the same. It appears now that the low may not make it into the Atlantic at all, but stay right in the Gulf, and that could guarantee some on and off downpours through Saturday. I'll have a lot more on this a little bit later on in weather.
Today marks the start of hurricane season, and already there's a system causing a bit of concern in the tropics.
Already on the first day of the season, right? Meteorologist Adam Berg joins us now. And Adam, forecasters say we're expecting a normal, near normal season at least.
Exactly, near normal, off to a quick start potentially. This is what we call invest right now, and the number we're getting is 91L. It's a system that will be investigated. There are some showers and thunderstorms, especially along the northern section of this spin. The good news for us, though, is that this system is forecast to move south. In fact, that orange shaded area, as we kind of tilt the map, this is the general development area. That number is higher, though. It was 20% this morning, now up to 50%, as we are seeing more showers and thunderstorms near that system. So anyway, move south. Not a direct impact to us, but there's still a dip in the jet stream, so we will continue to see these afternoon showers and thunderstorms. But yeah, a little unnerving, right, to see something so quickly. And speaking of the first day of the hurricane season, we also got an update out of Colorado State. Their numbers are revised slightly higher now at 15 named storms, 7 hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes. So along with Noah, this is pretty much spot on average for the season here. So we're hoping it's typical. We would love it to be even less than typical, right? So with the start of hurricane season, our team of First Alert meteorologists have put together our annual hurricane special titled Ahead of the Storm. So join our team of experts right here on NBC6 for important information you need to know to stay safe in case a storm strikes. The special is on tonight, NBC 7:30.
Some of that information is hurricane hunters getting out there.
Yeah, and they're in the air now, and you know, it isn't all that uncommon to have a system already formed or in the process of forming on June 1.
Right.
I mean, the hurricane season starts around this time for a good reason, but it is a bit ironic that hours into the hurricane season, hurricane hunters are doing their first flight. It's a short distance from Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi to where the system is, so they'll be in there quick.
Yeah, so we're going to get that information. We'll be bringing it to you throughout the show. If we do get tropical development, your anticipation is that this is not going to be long-lasting because there's a lot going on in the atmosphere that's going to work against this thing.
Yeah, this might be kind of a flash in the pan kind of tropical depression or tropical storm, but even before and after that period of its life, it could be producing a lot of heavy rain into the weekend in Florida. So these June lopsided systems often have a lot to do with heavy rainfall.
You know, it's kind of like the practice round, right? It's getting our brain in the right place here as we head into hurricane season, making us go, okay, this is happening.
And you got to be smart at the beaches and on the roads with this one, too.
Totally, totally. So there's going to be stuff to watch for. We're going to let you know. These are the beach conditions along Florida's Panhandle. They've had the red flags up. Our weather producer, Jess Arnaldi, is there. Cape San Blas, the location. Obviously, nobody in the water. The rip current danger, the rough surf danger, as Dr. Nab mentioned, could make things tough in the water. Rain will be an issue, especially farther into the peninsula of Florida. All thanks to this area churning in the Gulf. Dr. Nab, latest check. Now, the odds have increased, so more likely that we see tropical development.
Yeah, pretty good chance that we're going to get a short-lived tropical depression or tropical storm. But the reason it is going to be short-lived is that the conditions in the atmosphere are not ideal for robust development and long-lasting system. It's underneath an upper-level trough, and it is experiencing a lot of wind shear. So this is not the kind of situation where you get a hurricane to form. And also, it's not moving a whole lot over the next couple of days, but but then the conditions will get more hostile toward us. So that's why the center of the system over the next couple of days will be out over the eastern Gulf, but the center of action will be in Florida, at the beaches with the rip currents and the waves, with the heavy rainfall forming on the east side of this lopsided system. That's where the problems are going to be, in addition to some strong winds and high waves out over the Gulf of Mexico. You see this upper level troughing. That's not a strong tropical storm or hurricane kind of setup. Those kinds of systems have upper level high pressure, but there's enough divergence aloft to cause the pressures to fall at the surface, and there's warm enough water. It's cooler than it has been in the northeastern Gulf because of last week's system, but it's still warm enough, especially as the system slides to the south. High pressure to the north is kind of trapping it in the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. Not a whole lot to move it along right now. And again, not a tremendous amount of convection, but it has increased since yesterday in a more well-defined surface circulation than we saw yesterday. So that's why the hurricane hunters are going out there to see what we've got going on in there. How well-defined is the circulation center, and what kind of winds are we getting? You've got some buoys out there that have gotten gusts, over 40, over 50 miles an hour. So we have enough wind to be high-end depression or borderline tropical storm, but is it organized enough? They're going to have to make that determination. Here's the hurricane hunters now, having taken off from Biloxi, Mississippi. They'll be coming in from the northwest, and we'll bring to you what they find. But Alex, the problem is going to be the flooding in South Florida.
It's the first day of hurricane season, and we are already tracking tropical depression number 2 in the Gulf.
Meanwhile, we could see more strong storms. Here's a live look at the Local 10 radar. The Local 10 weather team is here. Hurricane specialist and storm surge expert Michael Lowry and chief certified meteorologist Betty Davis are tracking the tropics.
And we just got the 5 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Betty.
How appropriate, right, to have a system on the first day of the season. Tropical depression number 2 over the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. It is forecast to strengthen to a tropical storm. You can see there as it's moving southward by Friday afternoon, becoming a tropical storm. But then after that, by early Saturday, it starts to undergo a weakening trend as it's moving southward over those Gulf waters, Michael.
Yeah, some good news with this. I mean, sure, it is the first day of a hurricane season and already getting a system in the Gulf. But notice, Betty, no watches or warnings up right now for the coast. That's a really good point to this story, is that it isn't headed at least toward the coast. And like you said, it's going to stay pretty weak. I mean, maybe, and it doesn't take much. I mean, winds are already 35 miles per hour, but maybe getting a named storm, more than likely seeing Tropical Storm Arlene, but not much more than that.
Right. The environment, as it's moving southward, won't be favorable for it to strengthen.
It won't. And when you look at the visible satellite picture this afternoon, the one thing you'll see is the center of the circulation. Now, this is the hurricane hunters. They flew out from Keesler Air Force Base here in Biloxi, and they did a few little rows here where the center was trying to find the fledgling circulation, and they did find enough of a west wind on the south side for the hurricane center to classify this as a tropical cyclone. But all of the weather to the north and to the east of where the center of circulation is, Betty, which is telling us that this is really facing some very strong wind shear, though not quite as strong as the wind shear is to the south of where the circulation is.
Right, and the forecast track is going to take it down toward the south, running into that hostile environment.
Yeah, and this happens in June and in July, where the jet stream dips into the Gulf of Mexico. We still have those cold fronts that can get down into the Gulf waters, and the winds at the upper levels are still very strong. Today, we thought this may be drifting to the south. It drifted actually to the north in a more protected area here, and that's why it did try to organize, but like you said, Betty, drifting down to the south. So this is going to peter out over the weekend, and we should be drying out by early part of next week.
So let's talk about what we're looking at for the rest of the hurricane season. Perhaps you at home have seen the numbers. Let's break it down.
Yeah, these are new numbers from the forecasters at Colorado State University. They're the ones who sort of pioneered seasonal hurricane forecasting back in the 1980s, but they have upped their forecast today with now 15 named storms, 7 hurricanes, 3 category 3 or stronger. This is in line, Betty, with the forecast from NOAA and about average when you look at a season overall. But there are a lot of competing factors this year in terms of whether or not we see a lot of activity or whether or not we see a reduction in activity because of El Nino in the Eastern Pacific. We're just going to have to kind of wait and see how this all shakes out.
No matter the numbers, it only takes one. We have to prepare just the same. Back to you, Nicole and Calvin.
But first, we're tracking the tropics tonight. On day one of hurricane season, the first depression of the season is turning in the Gulf, and it's also having an impact on our weather. So we want to get to First Alert meteorologist James Whelan, who's tracking it all for us.
Yeah, and you notice two things. We got the 11 o'clock update, and you notice the name Arlene is not on it. It's
right, so that's good.
It's still a tropical depression, so it has not strengthened from earlier when it officially formed, and it has a very small amount of time here, and it's really just the overnight hours and tomorrow morning, maybe at most 12 hours time to strengthen into a tropical storm before it's going to move into an unfavorable area. However, during those 12 hours, it's going to be over very warm waters, so it does have the chance to do that. The forecast does call for it to strengthen briefly into a tropical storm tomorrow, and then as it moves south, it will get sheared apart and eventually dissipate to a remnant low here. The extra moisture from it will move over Cuba, then into the Bahamas to get ejected out into the Atlantic. But until then here, we'll keep an eye on this. Minimum effects to us, the effects we're going to see are the fringe effects, which we've been seeing all week long. It's bringing a whole lot of tropical moisture our way and feeding into this and making things a little bit unsettled here. Well, a lot of bit unsettled for South Florida for even the next few days. Still going to be that way.
But in the meantime, we got to get you all caught up on Tropical Depression 2 with Jim Cantori.
Yeah, guys, let's talk about this. Not much has changed this morning, except we have a TD2 from 24 hours ago. So we've got showers and thunderstorms that are juxtaposed kind of north and east of that center. The whole western and south side is dry, and it's going to stay that way. Okay, so it'll always be lopsided in through here, and it is moving or drifting to the south at about 5 miles per hour. This is odd to me, though. 285 miles to the west of Fort Myers. So if Fort Myers is right here, oh, we did move it. Chili, you did move it, didn't you? All right, there we go. It just moved. So the dot moved before we came on the air. How nice. All right, anyway, it was off to the north of that. This is why I was saying that. You can see the cluster of showers and storms that's going on off Apalachicola and Cedar Key. Obviously, this is no time to have a boat out there. The forecast is for it to drift south because of the current pattern. When you think about getting into deep summer, where you have a big subtropical, what we call Bermuda high, which is where it's centered around, all of the flow, usually in the tropics, even this part of the world, is from the east. All right, in this case, because we're into the early part of the season and we have this blocky pattern going on right now, we actually have a steering flow, a mean steering flow from the north. So this is taking this generally toward the south, which will be its demise. Hurricane hunters are going to be heading out. If they haven't already left, they're going to leave very, very soon. 6 p.m. again, and then 5:45 a.m. tomorrow morning should obviously be needed. But look at the abundance. All this orange is dry air. So not only do we have that, all right, but notice the difference between the cloud elements or the debris here in the water vapor up to the north here. God bless you, Abrams. I heard you sneeze. And also what's going on down here. Look at how fast that is. So the shear is stronger. It's about 40 knots here, and it's about 20 knots over the system right now. So it actually doubles the farther south you get, and you get in the dry air. So that does not bode well for this system. That said, the fact that we have a TD in through here has brought moisture into the Gulf of Mexico. It continues to float into Florida, but we'll have sea breezes, we'll have showers and thunderstorms, and certainly we could get some enhancement from that. But the fact that this is staying so far offshore, and even the banding with that is offshore right now, I don't know how much influence we're actually going to get in Florida. But keep an eye on the beaches, obviously. You still got a rip current risk, especially up toward Apalachicola. Could it become a storm? Maybe. It's already in warmer water, warm enough to do that, and we're going to get a couple of degrees more than that. But I think the fact that we get so much shear, and that's so much of an abundant player in this, along with the dry air, it's going to be very, very hard to increase in intensity from this point on. So there's the shear, there's the dry air coming in. Good luck, TD number 2.
I would be shocked if this thing became Arlene.
You and me both, darling.
But Crazier things have happened with
Right?
the tropics. I will say
Right?
that, but I would be shocked. I'm with you. That
Like
dry
yesterday
air.
morning when we went from 20% to 50%.
Exactly.
You are watching Weather Underground. I'm Alex Wilson here with our hurricane expert, Dr. Nab. Dr. Nab, we've got Arlene, tropical storm designated earlier this afternoon. Probably won't stick around long. And again, the weather that we see across Florida will be the same regardless.
Now, this has been a borderline depression storm ever since it formed yesterday. So it's just a matter of whether or not it's rounded to 35 or 40 miles an hour. This is not a strengthening trend by any means.
It feels like the B+ kind of A- thing. Like, where do we draw the line? Just give me the A-.
Yeah, and this is about to go C, D, F.
Yeah, real quick, right?
And that's thankfully what the wind shear is going to do to this over the next day and a half.
All right, so that's what we're watching. 40-mile-per-hour winds moving to the south at 5 miles an hour. As Dr. Nab mentioned, this continues to move south, and it will be weakening, coming up against some combative wind shear, to say the very least. Location is 265 miles to the west of Fort Myers. Of course, we've got Justin Michaels there. We've been checking in with him. He's on Sanibel, where folks there are, bracing for the season. Obviously, this storm is not going to be one that strengthens. It's not going to make landfall in Florida. In fact, it's going to move south and fall apart. But the rain showers, they'll be out there. And coming on a weekend, the folks there in Sanibel don't want to see that because they're hoping you'll go out and spend your money at some of those beach businesses and restaurants and help them get back up in working order after last year's Ian devastated the community. Some of the heavier rain showers you can see to the south of Tampa and around Fort Myers as well, and then inland areas getting in on some downpours. So flooding will be the key concern, and I wouldn't even necessarily say with Arlene as much with the circulation around Arlene. So that's going to help to pump up the moisture, Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico moisture. So you see this storm moves this way, but again, we've got that big ridge or that big trough building in. That's going to keep things unsettled over Florida, and with that storm offering up the moisture, you got plenty to work with, right? Warm water in the Gulf. We've had that pocket of cozier wind shear for this. It's moving into a much more, as I said, combative area. So, Dr. Nab, this won't be sticking around very long.
No, it won't, but at least we don't have any tropical storm watches or warnings for land areas, but we do have flood watches for southeastern Florida. So it's not like we don't have hazards to contend with. And as Alex said, it's not directly associated with the tropical storm. It's more to do with the moisture that the tropical storm is bringing into Florida and the upper level troughing and low pressure that is the cold air aloft to make Florida more unstable than it has been. And with this complex of lows extending out into the Atlantic, the flow off the Atlantic side, the flow on the southwest Gulf side, you're enhancing the sea breezes on both coasts, and you've got the really unstable air and all the moisture. We're going to have the boundaries colliding here over the peninsula, and then the storms are really going to fire up. Watch how they preferentially form inland and then move toward the coastlines after the storms form. So the metro areas could get some very heavy rain later this afternoon, and then it dies off. And then as Arlene goes farther to the south, tomorrow we do the same sort of thing again. Boundary collisions, afternoon storms, localized flooding will be possible. And it's not just today and tomorrow, because the remnants of Arlene will take until Monday to get east of Florida.
In the tropics, yes, we are keeping a close eye on Tropical Storm Arlene, the first named storm of the hurricane season.
And you see our hurricane specialist John Morales live with us with the details. Hi, John.
Hi, Shelley and Trina. Listen, across South Florida, we're still expecting waves of rain from this system that you see here behind me, Tropical Storm Arlene, which formed earlier today. And as Steve mentioned at the top of this newscast, not much has changed since it formed. It is a minimal tropical storm. It's only got winds of 40 miles per hour, and it's moving slowly towards the southeast. And we'll talk a little bit about that unusual motion. I've been seeing a lot of questions about that on social media, people wondering, why is this system moving south? We'll talk about that in a second, but there's the latest, right? You see it there on screen, and let's look at the visible satellite picture just to show you how the center of the system is exposed for the most part, meaning that, you've got a swirl of clouds here, but then all the thunderstorms are displaced off to the northeast, and that's generally an indication of a system that's pretty weak in nature. Steve also showed you the forecast track from the National Hurricane Center, and one thing that I do want to point out about what you're looking at is that, while we've got a tropical storm going on right now, it's expected to become a tropical depression as early as tonight, and then a remnant low before it reaches Cuba at some point during the course of the weekend. Steve showed you the possibility that whatever remains of this could head our way, and that's why there's that risk of heavier rains down the road. road. The upper level wind flow is pretty wavy. I mean, we've got an area of high pressure here, then a trough of low pressure over Florida, and that's part of the reason that you're seeing the system generally move towards the southeast, because it's being pushed along by these very winds coming in from the northwest and the upper levels of the atmosphere. That's why you see that happening. And again, no direct impact to us here in South Florida, but nevertheless, the risk of heavy rain over the next few days. And for that, we've got meteorologist Steve McLaughlin in the studio.
Now, 7 weather with meteorologist Erica Delgado.
And on that note, we'll talk about the new advisory that just came in on Tropical Storm Arlene. Yes, still a tropical storm with winds of 40 miles per hour. The pressure has dropped a little bit, so it's been trying to get its act together through much of the afternoon and early evening. But because it's now entering an environment where there has lots of wind shear and still lots of dry air, the system's just not holding together. So south-southeast wind, that's how it's moving towards the south-southeast at 7 miles per hour, and it's now being tracked out of the Dry Tortugas about 170 miles west-northwest of the islands. High pressure will continue to steer Arlene towards the south-southeast, and then we are expecting weakening to continue as we work our way into the weekend. And the National Hurricane Center saying that by tomorrow the weakening will begin, and that's when we'll see it become a depression, and eventually by Saturday evening possibly a remnant area of low pressure just before reaching western Cuba. So good news for Cuba, good news for South Florida, but we'll continue to keep an eye on things because that moisture continues to be funneled into our area, and you can see a lot of the moisture now moving from south to north. That will be the trend overnight with the occasional shower possible. Already seeing some strong thunderstorms here over the Gulf of Mexico that have triggered multiple marine warnings right now. So storm tracker from afar looking pretty active with lots of thunderstorms up and down our state. Lots of moisture now spreading across central Florida. That's the moisture associated with Arlene that we find in the Gulf of Mexico. But this is the dry air that it's battling, and you can see it's wrapping around it. So it's going to have a difficult time through the next 24 hours to regain any strength that it could have gotten or to get its act together. The moisture, though, continuing to push across our area. That's where we find Arlene. It remains offshore. Clouds and storms and heavy rain remains over portions of South Florida. And then by tomorrow, likely a tropical depression. And then by tomorrow evening, likely a remnant low. So tomorrow, once again, we are expecting another round of afternoon storms here. Flooding will continue to be a concern for South Florida. Eventually, that moisture spreading across the Florida Straits. And then by Sunday, even though we're expecting scattered storms, it won't be as widespread as we've seen. And we'll slowly begin to see an improvement, especially as we work our way into the upcoming work week.
We're going to get to all of your news headlines in just a moment, but one of the big stories of the morning is the weather. First, meteorologist Vanessa Venant with us. Vanessa, more wet weather on the way.
Oh, yeah. Later in the afternoon hours after 2 o'clock, that's when the strong thunderstorms will be developing right along the highways, across the Palm Beaches, and parts of the Treasure Coast as well. That trend continues, and it will become more scattered after 4 and 5 o'clock in the evening, and we could see a few strong thunderstorms passing through South Florida around 5 and 6 o'clock in the evening, mainly towards Okeechobee and Port St. Lucie and parts of the Palm Beaches as well. The latest on Tropical Storm Arlene, still spinning in the Gulf of Mexico. Good news is not going to get better organized. It's going to continue to track towards the south, and it will dissipate as a remnant low in the next 12 hours or so. So probably in the next advisory, I-11, it will be a tropical depression again.
The big difference between the last couple of days and tonight is that the last couple of days we weren't getting a direct moisture feed from Tropical Storm Arlene, but because of that huge counterclockwise circulation, it was pulling up the tropical moisture. Tonight, we're actually going to get some of the central portions of this storm. In fact, some very heavy rain is in the forecast over the next couple of hours. This is the latest advisory, and this system is no longer a tropical depression or a tropical storm. It is what we refer to as the remnants of Arlene, or post-tropical cyclone Arlene, because the winds are down to 30 miles per hour. And over the next 6 hours, this will be the final advisory. It's tonight into tomorrow morning at 2 a.m. And then the moisture left from the system, the remnants, will slide just to our south. And that's why we've got some very heavy rain in the forecast tonight. There's a system. Look at this. That's the counterclockwise swirl. And all of this has to move in. The Keys will get it the heaviest, but just basically draw a line up here like this. And what do you see? Miami. So from Miami south, the heaviest rain, but even up in Fort Lauderdale, we've got some heavy rain. We're going to time out everything for you hour by hour and talk about some drier weather that returns on Monday with our full forecast.
Hey, it's 1:30. Weekend Reach is rolling on. It's the first Sunday of June.
Yeah, it is.
Feeling like summer for
some. I'm Paul Goodlow.
And I'm Samantha Moore.
And I'm Lynette Charles. So goodbye and good riddance to Tropical Storm Arlene. It has dissipated in the Gulf of Mexico. It was the first named Atlantic storm system of the year. It formed on Friday and it brought plenty of rain to Florida. And we're going to continue to see some stormy conditions in Florida as, you know, we have this area of low pressure and how it flows. So stormy conditions not quite done yet, Paul. So we have to watch out for that.
Yeah, I love that GOES image there, seeing how the center was exposed. But I tell you what, it's still not done. That swirl is still on and popping here, still giving us pops or chances of rain or precipitation across South Florida. But I tell you what, it's always better in the Bahamas, but not weather-wise today. This morning, no showers and thunderstorms all across the Bahamas, but we still have our swirl going on with that low-level center of what's left of Arlene. So our weather is actually improving in Florida in terms of our chances of rain. Our humidity or dew points are down just a smidge. There's more northerly winds here in northern Florida, so this morning dew points in the upper 60s and dew points still in the mid to low 70s here in South Florida, hence the juicy air, the showers, thunderstorms. You can still see kind of that rotation, and we'll still see that kind of onshore flow of extra moisture from that circulation from Arlene. Arlene is really nothing more than kind of a wind maker in terms of a circulation maker in terms of where this moisture is coming from. But overall, that flow, that counterclockwise flow, that's going to help turn our winds more north from the land, bringing the air over the land down into South Florida as we head deeper into this week. And that's going to bring our rain chances from like 70% to 50% to maybe 30%. And that's a big deal in terms of where those storms will pop up and how often they'll pop up and the duration of that. But right now, the overall flow into your Monday is onshore, so watch out for the rip currents. But it should push that extra moisture across the state deeper in the day, so perhaps West Coast ocean kind of thunderstorms popping up on the sea breeze on the West Coast versus the East Coast. Can't rule out some storms on the East Coast, but we still, especially today, have the chance of more rain showers like the last several days, and flood watches are still a concern through tomorrow morning. But the forecast radar, scattered showers here, but things wind down a little quicker. But the West Coast could be quite active today and again tomorrow as well.
Let's have a look at the overview. We've got a couple of places where the tropics are bubbling up. In the East Pacific, right out here over parts of the Caribbean, as the models have been suggesting for a long time, none of those are real particular threats to the U.S. But how about this guy, this area to watch? Way out in the eastern Atlantic, not far from Africa. Let's have a closer look at that because it's going to be moving westward over the next week or so. It is a tropical wave. What does that mean? Well, we'll talk about that later because it does mean something and it's important, but think of it as a cluster of thunderstorms coming off the continent over the water with, over time, a pretty good shot at developing into a tropical cyclone, either a depression or a named storm over the next week as it rolls on this direction over the tropical Atlantic waters. Why does that matter? Well, we don't often see systems like this come off Africa, especially in an environment like this, where the water temperatures are so way above average. You might think, well, aren't they always over 80 degrees where this thing is going to go? No, not this time of year. We are running about 3 to 7 degrees, in some cases more than that, above average in record warm territory. So this thing is going to be moving over waters that are more typically consistent with later on in the summer or early fall. So with that in mind, given the fact that it's got warm waters to work with, let's track it, shall we? Somewhere over here in an unorganized kind of way for the next few days, but then potentially getting better organized, at least according to this one single individual model run, finding itself somewhere at that longitude in about a week, right? Good enough, right? It's somewhere over there. Question is it going to go north or south from there, assuming it's in some healthy condition? Well, the pattern is kind of all over the place. This is, again, one model run showing you there's airflow coming in like that. There's some airflow going like that. There's some airflow going like that. So who really knows? We can blur our eyes and sort of take some estimates of where it might, in about a week, find itself. Let's do that. One way to do this is run a whole lot of different simulations. And what are the averages of those? Well, some of them go that way, and some of them don't. Some of them go farther to the west. We are going to want to watch this one carefully. A long way out, guys. We are 10 to 12 days out from it being anywhere in this part of the Atlantic. So lots to deal with, but it's certainly one to keep an eye on, especially this early in the year.
Tonight at 11, we are tracking the tropics and a system in the Atlantic. Here's First Alert meteorologist Kate Wenzel with the latest. Kate?
John, we might have our next named system on our hands in the next day or so. Not yet. And the good news is it's nothing to do anywhere near here. We have to go way out in the Atlantic to find this. And actually, we now have a secondary wave behind Invest 92L. So 92L is located several hundred miles to the south-southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands. And it does have a 90% chance of developing in the next day or so. And you can see it's looking a little better organized, but still no close center of circulation. Until they have that, it will be harder to forecast exactly where it is going to end up. So you can see it's going to be moving to the west. It's moving to the west about 20 miles per hour right now. But a lot of the models want to curve it north before it enters the Caribbean basin. Not all of the models, though. And behind it, this wave has a 20% chance of developing in the next 2 days. So let's go ahead and put the spaghetti plots on there for you for Invest 92L, moving to the west, being steered by an area of high pressure, but a stronger system will curve north faster and quicker before it even gets close to the Lesser Antilles. A weaker system would drift further west into the Caribbean. So two kind of camps right there, and we'll have to track this each and every day to let you know which one it is going to be.
And we're also getting active in the tropics. Here's a big overview of what we've got right now. There is actually an invest area in the eastern Pacific, but we also have 2 invest areas there in the far eastern sections of the Atlantic. That's 92L and 93L. And Jen could be looking at this thing as a tropical depression here. In fact, that's what's expected at 11 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center.
Yep, we are anticipating that here. You can see both of these on the satellite picture, visible satellite. And the leading one definitely has more of a tropical look to it, doesn't it? Kind of more of a low pressure look. You can see actually some of the striations on the northern part of the storm indicating that there is some good outflow above, allowing the pressure to continue to develop and potentially strengthen. So this is something to monitor in those Lesser Antilles. We're tracking this, again, 100% chance. We're anticipating within the next 10 minutes, the National Hurricane Center will issue a Tropical Depression 3 for this one. In fact, they said that in a tweet here just about 20 minutes ago.
Here's the development area here, and again, looking for that advisory to come out here in the next several minutes here with the tropical depression. That would be Tropical Depression number 3, potentially on its way to becoming a tropical storm. Next in line on the list of names would be the B name, and that is Bret.
Bret with 1 T.
Yes.
Because I've seen it spelled other ways. Bret with 1 T. And
I didn't even catch that. Good catch.
By the way, in 2017, we had a Bret, and it formed on this date in this area. This is unusual to have development out this far in the Atlantic. It's just that we're so warm, well above any other year on record when it comes to the Atlantic water temperatures.
Pretty amazing to be thinking about another Bret.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, on the same date.
Yeah, wow, all right.
Well, not only do we have tropical depression now in the Atlantic, but we've also got, what's this over here? Another system behind our tropical depression. So it is not necessarily going to be just this system that we deal with this week. But for now, let's focus on this westward moving system at 21 miles an hour. It is booking it. And so the forecast track is pretty straightforward for the next 2 to 3 days. It's heading in the general direction of the Windward and Leeward Islands, but will it get there? Will it go over those islands? Will it miss to the north? How strong will it be? Well, one thing that is definitely working in favor of the system, unfortunately, to strengthen is the warm waters that are widespread, warmer than average, especially out here in the main development region, which is behaving a lot more like August and September than it is June right now. But also, there's the system behind it. The next tropical wave, but this is looking very, very healthy. They do not have Hurricane Hunter aircraft out there today. They made the declaration of a depression based on the satellite imagery. Can you argue with it? Very well-defined low-level center, low-level spin, and then look at the upper levels. High pressure, aloft, very weak wind shear in those warm waters. So it's like peak of season conditions. Now, we have had tropical depressions farther east than this. But if this becomes a tropical storm later today, east of 45 west, which is right about here, this could be the farthest east June tropical storm that we've ever had in the main development region. So this could, in some ways, be record-setting if this forecast verifies, and it looks like it's well on its way to becoming a tropical storm. But then, How strong will it be when it gets near the Windward and Leeward Islands? The stronger it is, the more likely it is to turn a little bit more to the right because it'll start to feel this trough. But if that increase in wind shear later on weakens it and makes it a shallower system, it's more likely to go westward through the islands. And you can look at the models here. Here's the Euro, which has a weaker but still potent system going through the islands. That is one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum would be the GFS, which has a taller, stronger system, but it moves more slowly and maybe clips the northeastern part of the island. So the timing and the strength and the intensity all very uncertain at this point. So we got to prepare.
So stormy pattern locally, but in the tropics, it's just taken off. I mean, John, this is almost like August or September, but just way too early. What do you think?
No, I mean, totally. And I'm glad you mentioned that second system because imagine, I mean, there's only been, since 1851, only 3 named systems in June out there between Africa and the Lesser Antilles. Only 3 in what, 173 years? And now you're telling me that there's a chance for 2 to form just this year? It's just an incredible development, and it has everything to do with sea surface temperatures, that warm water out there in the Atlantic. I invite you to NBC6.com. I've got a whole write-up on that, actually a couple of them. I started to preview this last week, and now, of course, we've got this, which is Tropical Storm Bret. And this gives you some perspective, right? I mean, there's Miami, here's the Greater Antilles, the Lesser Antilles, and on to that system, which is about midway between Africa and the Lesser Antilles. It'll take until this weekend before Bret can make it to the islands. But that's why they're dusting off those plans out there in the Eastern Caribbean, because there's a chance that indeed it will head their way, and they're going to have to worry about having to deal with a potential hurricane, according to the National Hurricane Center, heading out in that direction. This is the latest as of 5 p.m. Winds are 40 miles per hour, moving very quickly towards the west at 21 miles per hour. And when you look at the satellite image, you can see that, well, I mean, this is still a fledgling system, just up from tropical depression strength to tropical storm strength, moving quickly towards the west. And just barely on screen, you can make out that second system there. This one out here at the edge of your screen, that's Invest 93L, which has a chance of also developing, as Ryan just told you, over the next couple of days. Now, what to expect, let me try to show you here the next couple of graphics as far as the movement of this system is concerned over the next few days. It's expected to head out towards the west, and I'll just show you manually here on the image here behind me. It'll head towards the Lesser Antilles as a hurricane, according to the National Hurricane Center, and then start to lose strength in the Eastern Caribbean waters because of upper level wind shear. And by the way, that Eastern Caribbean, that's known as hurricane graveyard. So fingers crossed that history repeats itself and it does indeed lose strength. As far as Florida is concerned, we're not worried about it. Just something to watch, definitely a curiosity, but it's no threat to Florida. Back to you guys.
Chief Certified Meteorologist Betty Davis is here with what this all means for us. Betty.
Hopefully it means that we won't have to get into too much of a frenzy here in South Florida over Tropical Storm Bret. But here is what we have as of the new advisory. Winds of 40 miles per hour. So the National Hurricane Center not making any adjustments in the intensity just yet. Moving west at 18 miles per hour. You may remember earlier this afternoon it was moving west at 21 miles per hour. So just a teeny tiny bit slower. Here's the forecast track from the National Hurricane Center, and no huge changes with this. They are forecasting it to continue that westward movement, and notice the intensity forecast as well. It is forecast to become a hurricane by Wednesday evening and approach the Lesser Antilles near hurricane strength. So they're showing those winds at 70 miles per hour. Earlier they had them near 80 miles per hour. So that's a subtle difference. And then thereafter they show the system moving on over toward the Caribbean Sea. Now, they do mention that there is the intensity forecast is tricky, and there's still uncertainty in this track forecast, especially as you go out later on in the week once it starts to move over in the vicinity of the Caribbean Sea. However, they say that the consensus guidance did shift a little farther south and west, so they went just slightly farther south and west with their forecast track, so in accordance with what the consensus is showing. But obviously, this is a system that the Lesser Antilles and also the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico still will want to pay attention to. And notice as it's moving over toward the the Caribbean, they show the intensity dropping off. Friday evening, 65 miles per hour, and Saturday evening, 60 miles per hour. So though there's that trickiness and uncertainty, they seem to be leaning into the idea that this is going to be a weaker system once it gets over into the Caribbean Sea, because it encounters some unfavorable conditions, including wind shear that lies ahead come Friday, and also some drier air could start to do a number on it as well. So we'll continue to track this system. Right now, no watches or warnings to pass along, but it is forecast to strengthen as it approaches those eastern Caribbean islands later on this week.
But we are going to get a lot of rain here out in the Atlantic thanks to Tropical Storm Bret. We have two systems, Bret, and then with this one would be named Cindy. That's the next name on the list. Let's talk about Bret, though, because that is our tropical storm. Barely winds at 40 miles an hour. To be a tropical storm, they have to be at 39 miles an hour. And by the way, we typically get our B-named storm mid-July. We are literally a month ahead of average, but this is not necessarily an indication of what's to come for the hurricane season. Just because you start busy doesn't mean that it will stay like this all the way through November. It's also forecast to become a hurricane. Well, you know what? Typically, when we see our first hurricane, that's August 11th. So we are well above, I mean, these are just anomalies, and it's because we have low shear and very warm water temperatures. So that's one of the reasons this thing is kicking off. But it is going to be running into some drier air, and the shear will also pick up with this as well. A ridge to the north is going to steer this thing westbound, heading towards the Lesser Antilles here, so we will get squally weather out of this. Look at this visible satellite. You can see it has, you know, that center circulation. You can't quite see it with this, but you know that there are thunderstorms all around wherever the exact center is in this system right now. Temperatures in the water are going to get warmer as this continues to head west. And notice what's going to happen with the shear. That's the thing, is right now it's not really in a lot of shear, but very typically as we go into the Caribbean, we do start to see shear this time of year. So as it encounters that, will we run into some problems? It's possible, but even if it's light shear, it still might manage to survive. We'll continue to follow this and let you know where it goes from there. That's still quite a ways out. And as we go over the next 5 days, if you do have any family or travel plans down to the Lesser Antilles, Kelly, I'd be paying very close attention.
Something to watch all week long. Right now, your Tuesday front lines get started in South America. An extratropical cyclone, meaning not tropical, has killed at least 12 people after it plowed into Brazil's southernmost state. The storm unleashed floodwaters from a foot of rain along with powerful winds. Around 5,000 people have been left with damaged homes, many of those homes sitting in waist-deep waters.
We've got Tropical Storm Bret in the Atlantic. Could have another storm behind it. Bret expected to approach the Lesser Antilles here by the end of the week. It'll offer up a risk of flooding from heavy rain, of course, some wind and dangerous waves along the coast. And then again, we've got another system, another area of invest behind it that could very well become Cindy.
Yeah, we've never had two named storms in the month of June out in the main development region of the tropical Atlantic. Until yesterday, we never had a named storm as far east as Bret. And only 6 years ago, with another tropical storm, Bret, have we gotten a named storm out in the main development region as early as this. So we are really in mostly uncharted territory because of how warm those waters are. El Nino hasn't taken its effect on the Atlantic Basin yet.
Well, speaking of, we knew it was going to be an unprecedented season because we never had an El Nino setting in after 3 years of La Nina. We've, of course, got the record-setting warm ocean temperatures, and now look at what we've got. So no question as to why we're seeing some unusual stuff.
Yeah, now, Elsa did come through the Eastern Caribbean in early July, just a couple years ago. Doesn't look like this will be that strong, but could it be impactful as a tropical storm in a couple days? Watches could go up within the hour.
Tonight, the storm station tracking Bret, the tropical storm spinning in the Atlantic, headed toward a chain of islands.
And closer to home, a severe thunderstorm warning in parts of South Florida ending just moments ago, but we could still be settling in for kind of a stormy night. Good evening, everyone. Things are heating up across the Atlantic and here at home.
Chief Meteorologist Phil Farrow is live in the Weather Center with all the details for us. Phil?
And that's where we will begin. Here at home, we have plenty of thunderstorms. Look at Palm Beach and into northeastern Broward County. Heavy rain, gusty winds, and lightning. We had a severe thunderstorm warning until 5:30 for northeastern Broward, but that has been allowed to expire. However, still strong thunderstorms. There is one cell here that is moving to the northeast. It has the potential for gusty winds and also some small hail as it tries to make its way offshore. But all those little white hash marks, those are all lightning strikes. And take a look at this. Over the last half hour, there have been over 300 lightning strikes from I-95 north into the county line with Palm Beach. Meanwhile, in the tropics, here is the latest on Bret, which has intensified as of 5 p.m., up from 40-mile-an-hour winds to 45, moving west at 18. High pressure will continue to push it west. It'll probably make its way into the Caribbean, where another high will keep it there. And now it is also forecast to stay as a storm and not make it to hurricane status. Plus, we have another feature in the eastern Atlantic. We'll take a look at that a little bit later on in weather.
All right, and tracking the tropics, of course, we're keeping a close watch on Tropical Storm Bret and Invest 93L, which is still having a high chance for development. And we'll get to that one in just a sec. Let's talk about Bret. As of 5 a.m., the latest advisory, the winds have increased from 50 to 60 miles per hour. So there's some strengthening, but it's still a tropical storm. In fact, now the National Hurricane Center just keeps it as a tropical storm. Why? Because it's running into wind shear. By later Thursday through early Friday, it will be impacting parts of the Lesser Antilles. So there is a tropical storm watch in effect already from Dominica down to St. Lucia and including Barbados. Now, out at sea behind Bret, there is a slower moving tropical wave, has a good chance for development. If it does, it'll probably be a depression in a day or so. Also notice that all the models are in agreement that this might just stay over the open waters of the Atlantic.
Let's have a look at now Tropical Storm Bret. If you're just tuning in, you're like, wait, what? Tropical storm? Yeah, it came across Africa and then now moved through the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean, has strengthened into a tropical storm, and right now it is 470 miles east of Barbados, moving toward the west. So this is very likely going to impact the islands in the next, I would say, about 30 hours or so, maybe a little bit more than that. And we'll be watching for gusty winds and very heavy rain and some squally weather along the way. You might look at the satellite picture and see, well, the thunderstorms are kind of waxing and waning in intensity, right? We lose some of the reds and the oranges, and then we gain them back, and then we back and forth we go. Characteristic of a youthful tropical cyclone, no doubt about that. This one is not really poised to strengthen quickly, but it will bring some significant weather with it along the way, but the kind of weather that we're, certainly well suited to handle in parts of the Lesser Antilles. Here are the current weather conditions all the way from Anguilla south through Barbados. Not much different than your average tropical afternoon, with an east wind, a trade wind at about 10 to 20 miles per hour, and then some. Nowhere near yet to be influenced by Tropical Storm Bret, but that's going to happen likely later on this, well, maybe late tonight, probably not so much until later on tomorrow, so heads up there. It is going to be moving through the islands, and then from there, continue on toward the west, like this, like the guidance has told us now for quite a while. There's been a consensus in the model forecast that this thing would be heading west. Now, what happens to it as it heads toward the west? Well, let's track it as it does, because as we go, the clock time's at the top. Watch what happens as Bret moves on toward the west, and you'll be able to see it moving toward, let's see if I can do this. There we go. There it goes. Move toward the west. The winds over time will gradually increase overall, and we'll begin to see it move into a region of very high wind shear. Let me grab a hold of that and move it on a little bit faster. How about that? There it goes. And you can see it passing through the islands, but by the time it gets into the Caribbean, it's going to be encountering some very strong winds aloft that's going to likely destroy its tropical characteristics and eventually devolve into an area of low pressure with some breezes. That's about it. The official forecast from the Hurricane Center has it moving into the Caribbean islands and weakening along the way. That is expected as it moves likely in that path toward Central America. But that's not all. We got another system right on its heels, right behind it. 80% chance of this guy turning into a tropical system, either a depression or named storm in the next 7 days, moving on a path a little bit farther to the north than where Bret moved. And let's say it finds itself out over here early next week. Well, lo and behold, we've got a big trough on the East Coast, very likely to be in place. This is not expected to come close to the United States either. Guys?
At least all those days of showers and storms is kind of useful, keeping tropical things away.
Yeah, the trough and the unsettled weather in the east is doing its part to deflect tropical cyclones trying to get close.
Today we are tracking Tropical Storm Bret as it turns closer to the Caribbean.
The Local 10 weather team is here.
And our hurricane specialist and storm surge expert Michael Lowry and chief certified meteorologist Betty Davis have the latest on Bret. And Betty, we're going to begin with you.
It is a little stronger as of this new advisory. At 2 p.m. we were showing you the winds of 60 miles per hour. Now the maximum sustained winds at 65 miles per hour, moving west at 15 miles per hour. And at this point, about 375 miles east of Barbados. When we look at the intensity forecast down the road and also that forecast track, Michael, I'm not seeing too many changes in the thinking for where this is headed and how strong it's going to get or not get with time.
Yeah, Betty, some good news for us is that this one is up against some obstacles that we're going to talk about here momentarily. Here's the latest satellite picture of Bret. This is the latest information from the National Hurricane Center. And also have the watches and warnings. Tropical storm warnings are up for St. Lucia and Martinique there in the islands for the expectation of tropical storm conditions. Those 39-mile-per-hour winds or stronger will be approaching the islands, we think, sometime tomorrow, starting probably tomorrow evening and into the overnight hours on Friday. I should mention most of the weather with this system is to the north of the center of circulation, so it really does matter where the center moves precisely over those islands in terms of who sees the strongest winds. Nevertheless, though, some blustery weather moving through there, the eastern Caribbean, over the next 24 to 36 hours. Now, let's talk about some of those obstacles. When you look at the jet stream and the upper level water vapor picture, you can see a few things here. The gold colors are telling us where the dry air is, and of course, tropical systems really thrive off of moisture in the atmosphere. So to the northeast of where, the northwest of where the system is right now, you can see a little bit of dry air. That's kind of keeping this one in check this afternoon, but then a tremendous amount of dry air here in the central Caribbean. And also notice a dip in the subtropical jet stream. Those are all going to keep this one weak and actually dissipate this one over the weekend. So no threat to us here in South Florida. This will be unraveling by the time we get to Saturday.
Well, this is a waterspout spotted swirling along Florida's southwest coast this afternoon as stormy weather moved through that area. This video over on Fort Myers Beach. Experts say strong winds continue throughout the night and into tomorrow.
Chief Meteorologist Vitas Reed is closely tracking the tropics tonight. And Vitas, we know that Tropical Storm Bret is kind of strengthening at this point.
Well, the hurricane hunters have gone through there, and as they go through there, they send back real-time data to show if it's strengthening a little bit, but it's still tropical storm status, and it looks like it will run into some strong wind shear south of Puerto Rico once it crosses the Antilles. So we'll watch that very closely. So there are some changes headed our way as we track the tropics. So talking about Bret, once again, looking at the latest path from the advisory at 11 p.m. from the National Hurricane Center, you can see winds at 65 miles per hour, moving west at 16, pressures at 1,000 millibars as that storm continues to track over towards the Lesser Antilles. So Guadeloupe, these areas down here, Dominica, definitely may get that tropical storm force winds, also some heavy rain, some flooding, but that will continue to cross those areas and then move just south of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, but then start to lose some steam, as you see, by Friday into Saturday, and maybe just become an extratropical low just south of Hispaniola as we get into Sunday. So it looks like we're seeing this storm kind of lose that luster, but it looks like as far as the agreement, looks like pretty much most of these are showing it making its way to the south and then continuing maybe on towards Honduras and Nicaragua. So here's what it looks like with the secondary area of concern that we're watching. A little bit of a organized cluster of showers and thunderstorms behind Tropical Storm Bret, and that has a 90% chance of formation over the next 7 days, 80% chance the next couple of days. So definitely we're watching this as there is enough circulation and strength with that warm ocean water. But this is going to take a track towards the northeastern portion of the Antilles, but then heading up just east of Turks and Caicos and making that right turn back out into the Atlantic. So right now it looks like the United States is sitting in a safe zone, but we'll continue to watch that very closely as that makes its track.
And here's the latest
On the areas that we're following in the tropics, we have Bret and newly formed tropical depression number 4 behind Bret. As far as Bret is concerned, it's actually a little stronger. 70-mile-per-hour winds moving to the west at 15, located 200 miles east of Barbados. And on the forecast track, it will cross through the islands sometime Friday morning with 65-mile-per-hour winds, and we're expecting it to fall apart in the central Caribbean Sea by Saturday. And here's the latest on tropical depression number 4, 35-mile-per-hour winds moving to the west at 12, and this one will likely become Tropical Storm Cindy possibly in the next 12 to 24 hours. And your full forecast in a few minutes.
We've got activity brewing in the Eastern Pacific. We've got activity brewing in the what we call main development region here in the Atlantic Basin, kind of working its way all the way back where you're looking at Tropical Storm Bret, which we've been tracking for a couple days now, and now TD4, which could be our newest named storm, potentially as soon as today, all of it heading westward. So real quick, Tropical Storm Bret, 70-mile-per-hour speeds, no update with the intermediary update. Intermediate. Thank you. Steph's like, intermediate. That's like, I feel like I'm a teacher looking for an answer to a question. All right, so you've got this storm system that is kind of knocking on the doorsteps of the Lesser Antilles, 170 miles east of Barbados. And just looking at, you know, the overall strength of this thing, I think this is where we get to the peak of its development. And from this point forward, we'll actually start to see it wind down, so to speak. You know, we did have hurricane hunters fly through this thing and notice the, you know, speed of which the aircraft reconnaissance brought back some of the data, and that is that 70 mile-per-hour range is pretty much at its peak. So with that being said, we still have our alerts sitting here from Dominica to Martinique, St. Lucia, tropical storm watch for Barbados, and you know the storm is just to your east. It will be crossing over, bringing rain. You will get some coastal erosion out of this and some big waves. Obviously, the wind field associated with those 60 and 70 mile-an-hour wind speeds could be somewhat problematic. But what you can see is after it works its way through the Lesser Antilles, we start to see the wind field kind of decrease a bit. And that's because we've got a couple of factors that will help tear this thing up, so to speak. Now, it looks very nice here. When we take a look at our water vapor imagery, you've got, very good green associated with the moisture content. We know the fuel is present out in the Caribbean here with our water temperatures in the mid to upper 80s. But it's what's happening up above that's kind of tearing this thing apart. You've got a nice band of shear on the north side of this. You actually have some shear that this thing is pulling inside of itself as well. And as it works its way west, you have more of that magenta color or shear, and that is going to be the wind pulling it apart. So again, due west should stay south of Haiti and Dominican Republic. And then last but not least, TD4 is expected to take a little bit more of a northerly route, which we will keep an eye on this one.
Yeah, it feels like September, doesn't it? But it's not. It's June, and let's get ready to talk about Tropical Storm Bret as a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm moving closer to the Lesser Antilles, about, 130 miles east of Barbados as of the latest advisory, 11 o'clock Eastern time, so about 20 minutes ago or so. There's the system overall. It's actually the thunderstorm activity has weakened over the last 12 hours, and that's pretty evident. The reconnaissance aircraft are in there, Air Force. I'll show you that in a second, and they're finding that the pressures are actually probably above 1,000 millibars, at least where the center of circulation is. Overall, the weather conditions across the islands, really not that bad, not that different than you'd see on an average June day. 10 to 20 mile per hour sustained winds out of the east. That's your trade wind. And I do want to point out that the center of circulation is likely here on the western edge of the entire blob that you're looking at, and yet most of the bad weather is over here. So as the center gets closer, and while it may be 130 miles east of Barbados, the weather may not get all that bad. The worst of the squally weather will take place after the center moves to the west, like a tropical wave typically does. You kind of get the clear skies and the weather not so bad as the system is approaching, but then once it moves away, that's when the weather gets worse. Reconnaissance, as I mentioned, Air Force C-130 is in there. Been doing a whole bunch of slicing and dicing our way through Bret this morning. The most recent vortex message, which was as of 9:52, so a couple hours ago, pressure was around 1,005 millibars with the center of circulation somewhere in that vicinity. Now they're about ready to make another pass right across there. So you might be wondering, well, why are they kind of looking in that? Why is that where those black dots are? Well, that's really where the center of circulation at low levels is. And we lost the satellite picture here, unfortunately, but the center is right about there. And a lot of the big thunderstorms are all the way out here. So this is a sheared tropical cyclone. The low-level winds have pushed that center of circulation at low altitudes farther to the west, and the thunderstorms remain well back to the east. Where's it going? There's a consensus here. European ensemble members, each one of these tracks is a different simulation from that one model, ECMWF, and it shows you it's going towards Central America, weakening along the way. GFS does the same thing, so there's really no other option according to much of the guidance. So Bret will be moving toward the west, and there it goes. And as it does, look at some of these shades of blue and those wind vectors there showing you it's going to encounter even more wind shear than it's got now. So it's curtains, I think, for Bret in the long term, officially reflected in the Hurricane Center's dissipation of Bret as we go into the late weekend time frame. But again, there's another system behind it. I won't get through all these maps, but there it is. That's TD4, not likely to be a threat to the U.S. Keep an eye on it in the northeastern part of the Caribbean.
Is out in the tropical Atlantic in a way that we've never seen before. June, 2 tropical cyclones in the main development region east of the Caribbean. That's never happened before. Never mind 2 at the same time with TD4 and Tropical Storm Bret. TD4 moving off to the west-northwest. I'll show you the track forecast for that in a little bit. But Bret is getting very close to the Windward Islands. It does look like the winds have come down from 65 miles an hour based on the way it looks on satellite, but that isn't going to stop tropical storm force winds from impacting the islands here, especially when you combine that with the brisk easterly trades that you have anyway. But notice how it's always been struggling against some wind shear, but it's really struggling now. This might be the beginning of Bret falling apart. Maybe not in time for the islands to avoid tropical storm conditions, but the low-level center has moved off to the west-southwest and is now just about over Barbados. And you can even tell, look at these low-level clouds here. And with just a little bit of convection, the clouds start moving the other direction. So you can tell how Bret has always been kind of leaning back. The low level's moving a little faster than the mid level. So it's always been dealing with some shear and is really struggling now. But the low-level center and the pressure gradient around this is still producing some winds. Now, Barbados, their winds are going down as the center goes nearer over them. But look at these sustained and wind gusts that are near tropical storm force. So you're still going to get some nasty wind out of this. So the tropical storm warnings for these islands are well placed. But after it gets into the Caribbean, and maybe even faster than forecast here, Bret is probably going to fall apart. In fact, the process of it falling apart is already starting. There's TD4's forecast, currently forecast to go northeast of the islands, but let's not take that to the bank. If this stays a little weaker and goes farther to the west, it could reach the islands. Upper level troughing there over the northeast Caribbean is going to bring some northerly winds on its backside. Upper level high pressure is going to shear Bret apart.
Well, folks, this is Hurricane Specialist John Morales here from the home office in Miami. And as we look at the satellite picture that's behind me, we have 3 systems lined up. We have Bret just approaching the Lesser Antilles this very evening. We have a system midway between Africa and the Lesser Antilles. That is Tropical Depression number 4, forecast to become Tropical Storm Cindy. And yeah, I mean, we have another one lined up just like if it was September, rolling off the coast of Africa and moving towards the west, not yet being looked at by the National Hurricane Center in terms of, does it have potential of becoming a tropical cyclone? But I bet they'll start looking at that pretty carefully over the next couple of days. First, we'll discuss what's going on with Bret. We'll take this on the full screen so you can see the latest on it. Bret has peaked at this robust strength, but within the tropical storm category. It has not reached hurricane strength. It has a 65-mile-per-hour winds passing very close just north of Barbados just about now. And it is headed towards the Windward Islands here. So as we look at this image, I'm going to show you what to look for here in terms of which islands we're looking at. So up here, this is Dominica. Dominica was impacted very strongly by Maria in 2017. Here is Martinique. Then we have St. Lucia, and then we have St. Vincent down here. So it looks like with Bret passing very close to Barbados, it's going to be right close to St. Vincent or St. Lucia this very evening as a tropical storm, and then head towards the west, eventually start to lose strength and dissipate in the central to western Caribbean Sea. That's because of upper level wind shear. Again, two systems to look at here. As you look at this image, you do have to your left, of course, Bret, and this is that tropical depression number 4. The good news about tropical depression number 4 is that its trajectory is expected to be a little bit more towards the northwest. So it looks like, for the most part, miss the islands. Maybe some risk to the northernmost Leeward Islands, maybe some risk to the British Virgin Islands. They're just at the edge of that cone of concern, but it does appear like hopefully it'll miss that area. Plus, keep in mind, it's not expected to be much stronger than just a modest to perhaps strong tropical storm. The reason for all this, folks, as I already told you, we have the very hot sea surface temperatures averaging 81.5 degrees. That average temperature you don't normally see until September 1st. And yet here we are towards the middle and latter portion of June. Good news also, none of these systems are a threat to Florida right now. Back to you.
Because this is of importance. We've got Tropical Storm Bret out there along with TD number 4. Remember, we were talking yesterday about that invest on the heels of Bret. Well, now we've got a little more organization with this thing, and it is a tropical depression. On top of all that, the Eastern Pacific has yet to have a single named storm this season, but we do have a tropical wave and an area to watch that could potentially develop. So we're starting out with Bret, which doesn't look as good on the western side of this storm, but we have had somewhat of a convective blow up here in the last couple of hours. Maximum sustained wind 65 miles per hour. It's 55 miles to the south and east of St. Lucia, and this is moving around off towards the west, really due west. So this is going right into the Caribbean, and it's forecast to weaken with time because it's entering part of the basin here where the winds are just too strong, and that is not conducive for tropical systems. They like to have a very calm environment along with those very warm water temperatures. So there will be some gusty winds. There will be some torrential rainfall that could lead to some flash flooding, but should be something that folks there can handle. Now, on the heels of that comes Tropical Depression number 4, winds at 35 miles per hour. It is forecast to become Tropical Storm Cindy. That could happen even tomorrow as it tracks up towards the north and then the west. So notice that's expected to miss the Lesser Antilles, although it couldn't rule out some impacts with feeder bands in places like the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. So it's certainly something that we want to keep an eye on. Now, the models are predicting that we're going to have this nice big trough staying in place here across the eastern U.S., and that would then keep any tropical systems away from the mainland. And that is some good news if you like that. Bad news if you don't want a rainy weekend, because that's what we're going to get and lasting into early next week.
We've seen it a few times here, so pretty neat that we get to sharing these cool space things out there. All right, in the tropics here, down on Earth, we got a couple things going on. Tropical Storm Bret here, about to enter the Caribbean. It will be in the Caribbean by tomorrow morning. It is losing a little bit of punch here, 60-mile-per-hour winds. A lot of blow up back behind it, but you can see it's out racing all the deep convection, so it's getting a little bit less organized, and it may just even open up into a wave very, very soon. It's only got about 2 more days. A little blow up near the center, though, unfortunate for St. Lucia, because this would be the strongest part of the storm, and you're seeing that maybe some of the mountainous terrain there on St. Lucia helping with that too, a little bit of friction blowing it up. But they're on the right side of the storm, so they will be getting most likely 60-mile-per-hour winds with this too, and some heavy rainfall. The center kind of splitting the uprights there, but of course the right side of the storm is the worst side there, and there's still tropical storm watches or warnings up, that is, from Dominica all the way down to the Grenadines there, and that will continue to move westward at 18 miles per hour and then dissipate by Saturday night, maybe even sooner. It'll open up. There won't be a circulation anymore, and it'll just be an open tropical wave that will move into Central America. So that will be it with that one. Now, Cindy became a little bit better organized, or Tropical Depression 4 became a little bit more organized, just enough to be called Tropical Storm Cindy. It's hot on the heels of Bret here, but it will take a different path, but end up in the same result, which is being torn apart by shear and opening up into a tropical wave eventually when it gets north of Dominican Republic. So this will head up more northward instead of into the Caribbean, but still a lot of shear, big trough here in the east, and that's just going to shear it up and tear it apart, and then that will be it for that one. And the models do maybe bring the remnants up towards Bermuda. Conditions a little more favorable up there too, so it may spin up again if it holds together at all.
This is CBS News Miami Morning Edition.
CBS News Miami streaming live to your favorite platforms right now on the CBS News app. It's straight up 5 o'clock on this Friday, June 23rd. Good morning to you. I'm Keith Jones.
Hey there. Happy Friday, everybody. I'm Betty Nguyen. Thanks so much for making us a part of your Friday as we head into the weekend. But first, we got to track the tropics for you this morning. The latest 5 a.m. advisory just coming in. Lisette's got the latest on that. What do you know?
Yeah, as we're tracking Tropical Storm Bret and Tropical Storm Cindy as well. Neither of these a threat to South Florida. However, as we take you through here, the first advisory is for Bret, which is currently drenching portions of the Lesser Antilles and moving to the west at 18 miles an hour. You can see that it is very wet and windy here for the island chain as Bret is going to continue to push off to the west and remain a tropical storm, but stay south of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola. Eventually, it will dissipate by the time we get into Sunday morning and the end of the weekend. Tropical Storm Cindy is expected to stay a tropical storm through Saturday, Sunday, possibly Monday. And then as we head into the middle of next week, that's when it will become post-tropical but stay to our east.
So let's bring in Brian Norcross for this. Brian, we make a headline here with what's happening as far as activity goes, but the storms themselves don't look very threatening.
Yeah, these islands have dealt with hurricanes, and generally the structures are made out of concrete. Generally, they're low, although obviously there are people that suffer in these kinds of things no matter what happens, because there are people that just can't afford to have the hurricane protection and so forth. But generally, you're exactly right, Amy. And what's exceptional here is that we have 2 storms in the tropical Atlantic. Sometimes we have storms in the North Atlantic and kind of freaky things near the coast. But in the tropical Atlantic, nowhere in the record book have we ever seen this happen in June. So that is absolutely a little concerning. Let's look at what happened last evening. There's the track of Bret. And notice that this is kind of a smooth track. So we're going to wait the analysis of the National Hurricane Center to see if they think the center of the eye went right over St. Vincent or if it just missed. But anyway, generally it passed by, the center of it passed by St. Vincent. The worst weather is kind of an arc like that. So the strongest winds to the north and still to the east. So even as Bret moves away, there's still going to be more bad weather to come, but just kind of gusty, squally weather. Here are some of the gusts that we had come in. You mentioned some of them earlier. The strongest ones we saw were in St. Lucia. They're up to 69 miles per hour, and generally good, solid tropical storm force gusts. Haven't seen any hurricane force gusts, but I wouldn't be surprised if up on the higher elevations, indeed, they didn't have some when that went by. So here we are right now with a 60-mile-an-hour tropical storm is the estimate. Pretty good flare-up notice of thunderstorms just to the north, moving to the west at 18, so moving away from the islands, but lots of weather still to come through the islands here through the day today. It's going to be tonight before it's gone. Here, when we analyze the tops of the clouds, you see this big cluster here right associated with the center, and then other clusters back here. But again, this is just kind of a tail, and it's going to really blow pretty good and good downpours, and then moving on away. But if we look at the National Hurricane Center's analysis of the winds, here's where they think the extent of the 40-mile-an-hour sustained winds are. So they've already moved out of the islands. That's why St. Lucia has dropped the tropical storm warning. Still tropical storm warnings up for the Grenadines just to the south here, but the winds will slowly die down, but still be very gusty there through the day today. But then here's what's going to happen. Watch this as we go forward in time. Notice the Hurricane Center takes the winds down, and this is why all the model guidance indicates the storm is just going to slowly weaken and dissipate as we move on forward. What's happening? It's moving into dry air, and also we have these strong winds coming out of the north, kind of tearing it apart, so all that's going to be going on. All right, off to the east. Here we go off to Cindy, and there is Cindy now. And you notice this is kind of the other situation. Here, the cluster of thunderstorms is over on the west side because the upper level winds are pushing this way with this one, and they're forecast to let up a little bit. We have a 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm. Forecast is for it to become maybe up to 60 miles an hour or so, something like that, but the track keeps it off the islands. As a matter of fact, the new models that come in even keep it farther away from the islands. There's the consensus now, so I wouldn't be surprised to see the new forecast track at 11 o'clock actually push it a little farther away. So looking good for these storms. They'll be over in the islands here by this evening.
Tropics, so you get a live look at Barbados. Of course, one of the areas, not much of a wind. You can see a light breeze. The waves have been kicking up, though. We've got a lot to watch here in the tropics. Again, unprecedented for the month of June. Both Tropical Storm Bret and Tropical Storm Cindy moving through the Atlantic. And again, Bret, Dr. Nab, is beginning to impact, or is today impacting those islands across the Caribbean.
Yeah, it's been a long night with some very gusty winds in the Windward and Leeward Islands. And again, as Alex mentioned, this is the first time we've ever had 2 named storms at all in the month of June in the tropical Atlantic, east of the Caribbean. Now Bret has moved into the eastern Caribbean. And we've also got likely our first East Pacific system to form as we get into next week. But having 2 tropical storms active at the same time in June, that has happened before. Last time it happened was 1968 when we had Brenda and Candy going on at the same time. But notice they were not in the main development region, certainly not in the tropical Atlantic. And that year had 3 named storms in June. Oh my gosh, the year is off to this amazing start. There were only 6 more storms after June and no major hurricanes. Just another object lesson on how the early part of the season doesn't necessarily tell us how the rest of the year is going to go. Now, we've got this upper level trough over the Caribbean, and so Bret is about to run into tremendous wind shear, and then this high is going to shear it from the north. And then Cindy has upper level high pressure till it runs into that trough. So they're both going to struggle, Bret's not going to become a hurricane as it falls apart, and Cindy will struggle to get that strong. So here's Bret moving west quickly at 21 miles an hour, really feeling the increase in the wind shear. But last night we did have some very gusty winds. Look at St. Lucia gusted to 69 miles an hour, and it took until the morning for things to calm down. So even with a mid-grade to strong tropical storm, you can have some serious impacts. But things are getting better. There goes Bret. It'll be gone by the time we get to Sunday, and Cindy will probably pass northeast of the Windward and Leeward Islands, probably not affecting the U.S., Mike.
We'll see the best chances for rain across our metro areas throughout the morning hours, and then by the afternoon, a lot of that will continue to shift inland. So it'll be opposite of what we saw earlier in the week. Shifting focus in the Caribbean, we have Tropical Storm Bret. This is the latest advisory as of 5 p.m., I should say. Winds out of 50 miles per hour, now finally beginning to weaken as we were forecasting that it would. It's being tracked out of Curacao, about 170 miles to the east-northeast of the island, continuing to move across the Caribbean, and then the forecast models are suggesting that by the weekend, it'll continue to battle plenty of dry air and wind shear and should completely dissipate by the end of the weekend. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, we have Tropical Storm Cindy. Stopped its strengthening, so remained sustained at 50 miles per hour, moving towards the west-northwest at 16 miles per hour, being steered by high pressure just to the north of the system. Luckily with Cindy, this one is forecast to remain over the open waters of the Atlantic through at least the start of next week, but interest in Bermuda should definitely monitor the progress of Cindy. For now, it is forecast to remain a high-end tropical storm through the upcoming weekend.
This is CBS News Miami.
Tonight, we are tracking the tropics. We just received an update from the National Hurricane Center. It's on Tropical Storm Cindy and Bret. Plus, we are tracking wet weather. Next, weather meteorologist Cindy Pressler joins us with what we need to know going into the weekend. Hey, Cindy.
Hey, Naja. Well, we just got that update from the National Hurricane Center, and there has been very little change or even no change in the strength for either Cindy or Bret. We'll start with Bret at this point, and you can see the center is well away now from where the thunderstorms are. So Bret is really exposed tonight, and that's not good news for the strength. Winds are at 50 miles per hour, continues to move to the west at 8 18. This is really going to start weakening quickly as we head into tomorrow. So really, it looks like Bret is going to dissipate by the time we get into Sunday, and this is the reason why it is running into wind shear, strong winds coming out of the north. So this is going to be a problem for Bret. It will have no strength at all to work with. But Tropical Storm Cindy, that was named earlier today, this is actually looking a little bit stronger now. You can see the thunderstorms building all the way around the center. Winds are still at 50 miles per hour. It was looking very anemic or weak earlier today, but tonight looking strong. It looks like the conditions out ahead of it as it moves to the northwest now. This is moving at 15. Going to be favorable, at least for Saturday. Once it gets into Sunday, then it will start running into those very same winds that Bret has been running into, so the conditions will become unfavorable. This will start to weaken as it heads toward the northwest, so neither one of these is going to be any threat to South Florida.
Good morning, everyone. Time is 5:10, and here's the latest on Tropical Storm Bret. Right now has sustained winds of 45 miles per hour. In the Caribbean, eventually it will track towards the west-northwest, and it will dissipate probably tonight into tomorrow morning, so we don't have to worry about that system. Meanwhile, Tropical Storm Cindy spinning in the Atlantic Ocean just east of the Lesser Antilles. It is getting better organized, sustained winds of 60 miles per hour now, but in the next couple of days, it will make that track towards the west-northwest and not threatening anyone out there, not even the United States. Eventually on Monday and Tuesday, it will become a depression, and then it will dissipate by next week.
Leaving us a little bit dry overnight, though we wouldn't quite rule out a stray shower through the overnight time frame. Switching gears and taking a look at the tropics, we've got two tropical storms, Tropical Storm Bret and Tropical Storm Cindy. The good news is neither of these a worry to Florida or the United States. Bret continues to weaken as it continues to encounter some wind shear, dry air across the Caribbean. 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm here. We're not anticipating this to be much longer lived, as it should be dissipating as we really head into what should be about the next 24 hours. It'll try to work its way a little bit farther off to the west here across the Caribbean, but then eventually fizzle out as it does so. Tropical Storm Cindy continues to churn out across the western Atlantic. This is several hundred miles east of the Lesser Antilles, but that motion is to the north and west, and it will continue to eventually head out to sea. We're also anticipating weakening after sometime early next week, where it should be dissipating before it reaches Bermuda. Some good news there, and again, none of them are a threat to South Florida.
Worse.
Yeah.
But in the heat, you feel like, oh, this is the worst.
The thing about heat is you don't escape it even at night. The sun goes down, and if you're in a city with concrete, it's like a brick oven.
Urban heat island effect.
Yeah, and a lot of people lose their lives because it never cools down at night. There's no relief from that, so a big concern. But let's also kind of shift gears and talk about what this heat is doing across the tropics. It is firing up a lot of activity kind of early for this part of the Atlantic for this time of the year. Remember, we're still in June, and typically we'll see the western Atlantic and the Caribbean and Gulf active beds, but not so much these storms. They actually came off of Africa, what they call the MDR, the main development region. Now, yes, if this was late July, yeah, no problem. Expect that, but not in June. First storm, Tropical Storm Bret. 11 o'clock update, still a 45-mile-per-hour storm. Moving faster, west, 21 miles per hour. Good news, meaning it's being sheared, so we don't expect this thing to really redevelop, but it's still bringing weather. That's the island of Aruba, the islands of Curacao, and that's Bonaire. They call them the ABC Islands, but it's really the ACB Islands. Bottom line is they don't get a lot of tropical activity because they're so far south, but they're definitely getting some rain, and many Caribbean islands need rain for drinking water, so that's good news there. It's forecast to weaken as we head throughout today, probably not make it past the calendar day into Sunday for sure. Meanwhile, west of there, we have Tropical Storm Cindy, 60-mile-per-hour wind, moving northwest now at 20 miles per hour, moving fast. You can see how some of the clouds are kind of streaming up to the north. It's being pulled north by a ridge of high pressure on the backside of that system, and it's also going to encounter some shear. Visible satellite definitely shows some circulation, but not super organized. There's that center looking really good right there on the satellite, but a lot of the convection is well off to the south of that, and it's moving over some warm water, so it has a chance to stay together. But on the backside of this high, it approaches, say, the east coast of the U.S. Is that a concern? Oh, no. No, because a big trough is coming on shore. That is acting like hurricane repellent, and it'll keep it off the mainland of the U.S., but still going to create some waves. Both systems across the Caribbean and the East Coast beaches of the U.S.
Here's the tropics. Bret is no more a tropical storm. It is the remnant low now, just north of Colombia, still producing some gusty winds, but it's not organized anymore, so Bret's done. Here's Cindy. Cindy, a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm, but currently no threat to land. It's forecast to dissipate by the time we get to Tuesday. It runs into hostile conditions. Aside from those two, everything is nice and quiet. No new systems are expected to form over the next week. Zanella?
Now take a look at our water vapor imagery. This is in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere. We have a tropical storm, and then we did have a tropical storm in the Caribbean Sea. This was Bret. We were talking about it for a very long time. The last advisory was issued earlier this afternoon. You can see not much going on. Nothing really sustained there because of a lot of wind shear in the Caribbean Sea, which helped tear this storm apart. Wind shears, winds in the opposite direction in the upper atmosphere. That does prevent storms from really holding together, and that's going to be something that Cindy will be dealing with. So it's really not anticipated to be much stronger. Notice that big gap right there between the days, and that's because it is going to slow down. It's going to encounter also some wind shear over the next several days as well. Now, computer models does take this pretty much to the east of Bermuda, maybe heading towards Halifax, so that's in the Canada area there. And then other than that, really no threat to the continental United States. So 3 names down at a point when we did have the 2 tropical storms in the Atlantic. That's something we haven't seen since the late 1960s with Bret and Cindy. Next name on the list is Don, and nothing expected to develop in the tropics, at least for the next 2 to several days.
Take a look at the tropics for you this morning, though, because I want to update you on what's going on out there, or really not going on out there. Things are really falling apart pretty quickly, so I've got some good news to report. There is really quiet weather over the Gulf and the Caribbean Sea, but over the central waters of the Atlantic Ocean. By the way, in the Caribbean Sea, what used to be Bret has now dissipated. Just a little bit of batch of a little cluster of thunder showers down there, but the National Hurricane Center no longer writing advisories on that. There's Cindy, a tropical storm, but it's beginning to get sheared apart, and a few weak tropical waves out there in the Atlantic Ocean this morning as things are really kind of backing off now. Cindy, as of 5 o'clock, has got winds of 50 miles an hour. Moving off to the northwest, it's going to dissipate as we head into the day tomorrow. So it looks like once we get past tomorrow, things really calm down in the tropics, at least through the foreseeable future. I'll be back with our rain chances to let you know who will see it and when today in just a few minutes.
Now we're dealing with the C name. That's Tropical Storm Cindy here across the Atlantic. We had Bret. Bret's still a swirl, but nothing advisable. But Cindy still has an advisory on it as a slowly weakening storm, but it's unique. Definitely seeing the spin, but the spin has kind of outrun the convection or the thunderstorms, and hurricanes, tropical storms are organized thunderstorms, and the organized thunderstorms are nowhere near the center. It's getting a lot of shear here, but that circulation is going to work on some warm temperatures as it moves on towards the north and west. But the same front that's bringing us the storms here across the Ohio Valley and eventually northeast tomorrow, that's going to keep Cindy offshore, but it could be bringing some weather, some impacts to Bermuda as we head deeper into this week. So stay tuned if you have concerns on that beautiful island.
And it looks like temperatures down to the 70s into the overnight hours. Here's the latest on Tropical Storm Cindy. Has winds of 45 miles per hour. It's actually going to dissipate as we head into tomorrow morning, and that's the only thing going on out there. Again, this system not expected to last long. By early Monday afternoon, it will become a trough of low pressure.
Downpours across South Florida today, a line of thunderstorms triggering flooding like this in Wilton Manors and other areas of Broward, some of which are still recovering from damages done by the historic rainfall back in April. And storms made for a muggy and soggy Sunday in downtown Miami. Just take a look. This wall of rain sweeping the skyline. It caused a number of flights to be canceled or delayed at Miami International Airport as well. But at last check, operations seem to be back to normal this evening. So now let's bring in certified meteorologist Luke Doris to see what's in store for for the work week. Luke.
Well, we do have more storms lined up tomorrow. I'll show you those in just a second. But the rain that we had today is long gone. Everything has turned quiet as we go into the evening, so that's been nice to see. As far as rain totals went, this is not an incredible amount of rain for South Florida. We get some heavy-duty showers and thunderstorms pretty regularly, but we did tack up 2-3 inches of rain near coastal Broward, northeast Miami-Dade, down here by Homestead in a pretty short amount of time. And we've had a lot of rain here recently, which exacerbated the problem, which is why we saw some spots of flooding. All right, so now let me take you to the forecast radar. Rest of tonight looks fine, no problem. Your morning commute will probably be okay, though there's a chance for an isolated shower. I think better chance down here in the Keys. But much like today, I gotta say, this is strikingly similar to what we had today. We get into the early afternoon, the mid-afternoon, it lights up again, and showers and thunderstorms are a pretty good bet again tomorrow. Okay, let's talk tropics, and Bret is gone. It dissipated yesterday. That's all that's left of it. You can't hardly see anything but some leftover clouds. And Cindy, this just came in. Cindy is no more. All right, it is now degenerated into a remnant low, and this will be the last advisory from the Hurricane Center. It no longer has a closed area of circulation. So we have nothing on the board right now. Is there anything expected to form this week? Well, we have dust, and a lot of it that's finally coming across the Atlantic. We have had lower dust than usual so far this year, but this helps dry out the atmosphere and prevent development, suppress development anyway, and it's in full swing this week. Nothing is out there expected to form over the next 7 days. At this point, looks good.
Much quieter than it was this time last week, but that's not to say we're done looking at Bret nor Cindy. Cindy in particular. So want to bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Nab. Of course, that area to watch behind me in the Atlantic, that is what's left of Cindy.
And it could very well make a comeback near or over Bermuda. But after Cindy, it looks like maybe the Atlantic might go a little quieter for a little bit. And I wanted to point out how the Atlantic Basin and the East Pacific Basin often act as a seesaw. When one's active, the other's not, and vice versa. In fact, look at so far this year. We've had 3 named storms in the Atlantic. We've had nothing in the East Pacific yet.
Right. A lot of people are going, wait, doesn't that season even start earlier? And given the conditions, shouldn't we be seeing a lot more activity? We may.
Yeah, and especially in an El Nino year, you would expect the East Pacific to wake up. And now this week, after Cindy and its remnants, I don't think we're going to get much in the deep tropical Atlantic this week. But why not? I mean, the waters are still warm,
right?
And the East Pac is probably going to wake up. And why? Well, that's because it's not just about what's happening for the whole season with El Nino and La Nina. There are weather patterns that move around the globe from your side on the Pacific side to my side on the Atlantic side. And every 1 to 2 weeks, things kind of change. And so now what's happening on the Atlantic side is it's getting a little bit quieter as a favorable regime moves into the East Pacific. And we used to say at the Hurricane Center, you just got to peel the banana. Once the East Pacific lights up, you wait a week or two, and the Atlantic will probably get that.
Because that's going to move.
Right. And so what happened last week was there was a negative, suppressive phase in the East Pacific side. Atlantic had a positive phase. But that has moved into the Atlantic, so the Atlantic might be taking a brief nap while the East Pacific lights up, but then later on, you'll have another cycle of it. Right. And I would say in a couple of weeks, another positive phase comes in the East Pacific, and then mid-July into late July, it looks like it could be pretty favorable in the Atlantic.
And for folks asking about El Nino, do we anticipate El Nino to be a little stronger by then, to maybe,
yes,
or could things still be just as active as what we've seen in June?
Yes, that's the thing. El Nino might eventually get strong enough to rule the roost, and it doesn't matter what phases are coming through the East Pacific, will be busy, the Atlantic won't. But the other thing, El Nino makes the Atlantic and East Pacific act like a seesaw. Look at the most recent El Nino that was really strong in 2015. The Atlantic was way below average. We had that big major hurricane Joaquin, but the East Pacific was record-setting, way above average, including the strongest hurricane on record in the East Pacific and Atlantic, Patricia. So sometimes El Nino makes the two basins act totally opposite.
Right.
But this year, again, the X factor is, yes, El Nino is probably going to make the East Pacific go active, but will the Atlantic be on the downside of the seesaw, or will its warm waters make up for that?
Right. And isn't that the multi-million-dollar question here? We all want to know, so it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. Dr. Nab, thanks so much. Mike, over to you.
All right, let's take a look at the tropics. Of course, we are 1 month into hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin. We were off to a pretty busy start, especially for far eastern Atlantic storms, and there is an area to watch by the National Hurricane Center, but more importantly, over here in the eastern side of the Pacific or Eastern Pacific, this is where we do have not just a hurricane, but a tropical storm that is forecast to become a hurricane. So let's start you off with Bermuda right here. This is the area to watch, that cluster of storms. National Hurricane Center only giving that about a 10% chance of developing over the next couple of days, over the next 5 days. So really not looking likely that we'll get our D storm, but it still could impact Bermuda with some squally weather, some showers and some thunderstorms. As we look to the broad Atlantic basin, the main development region, of course, this is where we've had some activity already. And you can see there are some storms rolling off the coast of Africa, but right now the National Hurricane Center not highlighting any of these areas. And we do have a little bit more dust coming off the coast of Africa as well. Here's a look at all the dots representing where tropical cyclones typically develop during the month of June, usually close to home. Gulf of Mexico, Western Caribbean, sometimes off an old front in the southeast coast. But as we look in July, we start to look farther out in the Atlantic basin, even across the northern Atlantic. Every dot on this map represents where we have had some July storms form. So we'll keep an eye on that for you. Meanwhile, we've got Hurricane Adrian in the eastern Pacific, Tropical Storm Beatrice, which is already affecting places like Acapulco with some very heavy rain, and that is forecast to become a hurricane. Adrian's already a hurricane, Category 2, 100 miles per hour, forecast to weaken as we go through the rest of the day today, so that's good news. There's Beatrice right behind it, though, and you can see that blob of convection right there, right along the west coast of Mexico. Many of these resort towns being impacted by the heavy rain and 65-mile-per-hour winds near the center of that storm. And it is forecast to become a hurricane, so not just a tropical storm warning for Acapulco. We also have hurricane warnings in effect for places like Manzanillo as it continues to work its way up the west coast of Mexico and then eventually curving to the west and moving into some cooler water and diminishing or weakening as we head towards the middle of next week. Hurricane Adrian also kind of peaking out right now with 100-mile-per-hour winds. It's going to weaken pretty quickly as we go through the weekend once it hits those colder waters.
Let's talk to our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb, now for a look at the tropics and Mexico squarely in the crosshairs for a hit here, Dr. Knabb.
Yeah, Mike, tonight the large metro area of Manzanillo, Mexico could take a direct hit from Hurricane Beatrice. And out in the East Pacific, we have two hurricanes. Adrian formed earlier this week, and then right behind it, Beatrice. And on the Atlantic side, our slight chance of formation near Bermuda, those chances are going down. So the hurricane hunters from the Air Force aren't flying anything in the Atlantic basin. They're flying into Hurricane Beatrice today. And that is because it is land threatening. It's not just, they don't just fly for U.S. interests. And we've got these two hurricanes here with very weak wind shear and extremely warm waters. And these hurricanes are only about 650 miles apart. Good news is for Adrian is slowly moving westward away from land. It's a Cat 2, thankfully, is moving away. But twice as far away from Beatrice as Adrian is where the hurricane hunters are stationed. And they flew the 1,200 miles. They took off at 9 o'clock this morning, and about 1 p.m. Eastern time this afternoon, they got into Beatrice to get an estimate of the max winds, and they found that it was even stronger than the satellite estimates had shown, and they got up to 85 miles an hour. So Hurricane Center, the intermediate advisory, upped the initial intensity to 80, and it could be even stronger than that now. Going very quickly to the northwest, skirting the coastline, Manzanillo under a hurricane warning, Puerto Vallarta hurricane watch, and Manzanillo could get the tropical storm force winds a little bit after sunset tonight, and then late tonight in the overnight hours, Mike, Manzanillo could get the direct impacts of a strengthening hurricane.
De 91 a 92. En cuanto a oleaje, no tenemos prácticamente oleaje, no solamente en nuestras playas. La playa está prácticamente sin oleaje. El único problema que tenemos es justamente que la lluvia puede llegar en algunos momentos, y no solamente aquí en nuestra área, la costa oeste, a las personas que están viajando este fin de semana, tampoco con oleaje. Toda la zona marítima inmediata a nuestra área, estrecho de la Florida hacia Bahamas, las personas que andan en botes en los próximos días, de aquí al domingo, el lunes no hay oleaje, el martes tampoco hay oleaje, así que buenas condiciones del tiempo. En el Pacífico mexicano tenemos a Beatriz, huracán que está azotando las costas de México, incluyendo Colima, incluyendo también a Jalisco, como un huracán categoría 1. Para nosotros, repito, calor y tormentas que se mantienen hasta el feriado.
July 1st, now
Yes.
1 month into hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin, got off to a busy start, especially over the far eastern part of the ocean.
Yeah, and then we hit the brakes in a major way, which is good. We're
good.
happy about that. We really are. But we still have a long way to go, obviously.
Yeah, Don is the next name on the list. Let's see if we have anything in the making here. And thankfully, the Hurricane Center has put out that huge label. No development expected the next 7 days. We have a lot of Saharan dust, by the way, that's helping to inhibit storms from developing, at least for the time being. But we do have a lot of action in the eastern Pacific right now.
We certainly do. And as we hop across, you'll find Hurricane Adria with winds of 80 miles an hour, Category 1 moving west-northwest, sailing at 7 miles per hour, Kelly.
Yeah, this time yesterday was a Cat 2 with 100 miles an hour, but thankfully that is weakening as it continues to move westward and will encounter those cooler Pacific waters and therefore really get knocked down to a remnant low by the time we get towards Monday.
So good news in the long-term fade. Meanwhile, we've got Beatrice, and this is just hugging the coastline. A lot of convection just to the west of center. Winds of 60, Kelly.
I mean, it was affecting Acapulco yesterday with some showers and storms. Thankfully, now well past there. But Manzanillo, Puerto Vallarta, this is where we are concerned about tropical storm conditions, and that's why you got that warning in effect. No longer expected it to become a hurricane, though.
There you go. You've got a current that runs from north to south. It's the California current. Tends to be cooler. It's going to be running into that. Maybe a little bit of shear, but I think the cooler water is going to be the big difference maker. And yes, we've got a long way to go.
We got off to a late start in the East Pac, but yeah, 2 names off the list right now.
Well, switching gears and taking a look at the tropics, we are quiet. Good news as we kick off now the month of July across the Gulf, the Caribbean, and even the Atlantic. A couple of tropical waves you can see, kind of notice there, though none of them expected to develop into anything, and we're not anticipating any new tropical systems for at least the next 7 days.
Now talk tropics, including that update to our seasonal forecast from Colorado State. Probably the biggest headliner is that they've upped the numbers of hurricanes and major hurricanes.
And what is going on if it's an El Nino year, right?
Right.
I mean, isn't El Nino supposed to keep the numbers down? But El Nino is only one factor this year, an important one, but it's only one. It's the warm, record warm Atlantic temperatures that are driving these numbers up. And my attention is really drawn to the fact that despite no majors, no hurricanes yet at all this year, they've upped the numbers. So this is, from this point forward, we're going to get 9 hurricanes and 4 majors, according to this forecast. But these seasonal forecasters will tell you these numbers have a lot of uncertainty associated with them because this is, in fact, an El Nino year, and maybe we get a moderate to strong El Nino developing here in the Pacific. And we're already starting to see the atmosphere behaving like an El Nino year with the active Pacific now and some wind shear over the Caribbean and the Atlantic. But you can't ignore the fact that we have record warm temperatures across the Atlantic Basin, and not just here in the deep tropical Atlantic, but here in the northeastern Atlantic, because that's a predictor for peak of season favorable conditions down here in the deep tropics, because this is an indication of having a weaker than average subtropical high for the last several weeks, and that weakens the trade winds down here to not bring up as much cool water. It has lessened the number of dust outbreaks, and that has allowed more sunshine to warm the waters up. So there are so many predictors pointing toward an active season, but there are a lot of predictors pointing against it, including, look at all the wind shear we've got here that seems very much like an El Nino kind of setup. But we've never had a year quite like this. The closest analogs are years like 2004, warm waters, but a weak El Nino, and even 2005, super warm Atlantic waters, but that was an ENSO neutral year. What is going to happen with a strong El Nino versus warm Atlantic, Alex? That is the big question.
Sometimes I think it's great for you guys to actually see when things aren't active, just to kind of go exhale a little bit and say, I'm going to enjoy my weekend. Yesterday, I told you that Phil Klotzbach of Colorado State University was going to come out with his 3rd update of 4 for the hurricane season. And look at this. We've gone from 14 to 15 to now 18. So he's gone up in his numbers, 9 hurricanes, 4 majors. So that's certainly above average. Remember, we've already had 4 systems, but now you're talking about an above average season in what is expected to be a moderate to strong El Nino. So this is kind of uncharted territory in terms of where we are. Why? Because the water is so doggone warm. If you look at these colors and you go up to the legend here, you're like, wow, 5 to 10 degrees above average over the whole basin. So as I mentioned, we've already had 4 systems. All right. The unnamed storm in January is the first one, and then the other 3. both of them forming in the eastern Atlantic anomalously at a rare time of the year. The good news is we don't see anything that really stands out over the next week or so in the Atlantic basin. It's really Pacific loaded. But notice, you know, in July, you start seeing a lot more areas open. You've got the Gulf, you've got the Western Atlantic, you know, certainly the Eastern Caribbean and across the main development region. So it's the Pacific systems that we'll watch. 90 and 60%, these will both be moving away from land and will not threaten anyone, but maybe kick up some waves in the Southwest, Steph.
Good morning. Time is 5:10. Tracking the tropics. Things are quiet near South Florida and the Caribbean. Now the National Hurricane Center is watching a low pressure system just east of Bermuda, far away from the United States. That system will be tracking towards the northeast and has a very low chance for tropical development in the next 5 to 7 days. And that's why we're going to see some development up here because there's no Saharan dust, but a plume of thick Saharan dust will be hovering over the Atlantic Ocean around this area. Basically, it's going to be pretty quiet for the tropics in the next 5 to 7 days as well.
It just shows you don't need a tropical storm to have tropical downpours, right? And we're in this month of July, which is often a transition season where we get homegrown systems, usually, Bret and Cindy notwithstanding, in June. And then July, we start to see more happening out in the deep tropical Atlantic. But then we can also have things happen, you know, off the East Coast and up in the subtropical Atlantic. But we are early yet. We are nowhere near the peak months of the hurricane season. The atmosphere, ocean system will change a lot over the next month. And with all those really warm waters out there in the Atlantic, how quickly will the peak of the season ramp up? That is one of the big questions. And when we look at what we're going to be dealing with, we've talked a lot about how El Niño is really setting up in the East Pacific, but we've got the record warm waters in the Atlantic. How are those two factors going to battle one another? Because again, when we've already got a decent El Niño out there, and we've already seen an increase in the wind shear over the Caribbean. And in general, we all kind of understand in very general terms that when you have warmer than average water in the East and Central Pacific and you get that El Niño setup, that increases the wind shear on the Atlantic side and lessens the overall numbers. But did you know not every part of the Atlantic basin is affected the exact same way by the wind shear and the sinking that is influenced by El Niño? In fact, let me show you from a published scientific paper on this topic where they did how does El Niño induced wind shear correlate with tropical storm formation, and it's very negatively correlated, especially in the Caribbean. That's where El Niño has its biggest influence. But look at how you get out into the tropical Atlantic and the East Atlantic. There's not much impact, not much correlation at all between El Niño's wind shear and sinking and the storm formation. So with the Atlantic being super warm in the tropical Atlantic this year, look at what the climate models are showing. Look at all of that green way over there in the East Atlantic by Africa. What these models are saying is that the peak of the season is likely to be busy out in the tropical Atlantic, maybe not in the Caribbean, but could the storms find a way to come north of the Caribbean, Mike, and head toward the U.S. that way?
Hurricane specialist and storm surge expert Michael Lowry is here with today's tropical update. Michael.
Nicole and Calvin, the dust a little late to the hurricane season party this year, but better late than never. We're going to return to the dust here in just a minute. I want to start with a new area that we're watching in the North Atlantic for possible development this week. As we turn the calendar to July, we typically look toward the main development region of the Atlantic. This is in the eastern part of the Atlantic compared to in June as we look to the western part of the Atlantic for development. But today we're not looking at either place because we have an area here in the far north central Atlantic that the Hurricane Center is monitoring, that kidney bean shaped area. Medium chance that this non-tropical area of low pressure could become our next system here over the next several days. That flooding, that sort of ongoing historic flooding that's happening across the Northeast today, this is loosely affiliated with that. That system is spitting off a number of low pressure centers, and that middlemost low pressure center is going to try to do something this week in terms of organized development. It may take advantage of some very warm waters out here to transition into a tropical system. system, but you can see it's way out in the middle of the Atlantic, so no worries for us here. It's going to sort of meander at least for the next several days. Now, returning to the dust, we've seen very little dust up until this point across the Atlantic, but this week, the past few weeks, we finally see a big push of Saharan dust across the tropics. You can see that really putting a lid on any organized development in the areas where we typically see our strongest hurricanes form. So things are going to stay pretty quiet here, it looks like, for the next week or two in the tropics. Calvin and Nicole, back to you.
Let's talk about Saharan dust here. Okay, you can see what's going on. That's that big area coming off of Africa, the Sahara Desert there. The winds are what we call easterly, and they blow that dust off, and it travels for thousands of miles across the Atlantic. We've seen it in Texas. We've seen it in Oklahoma. We've seen it in Florida before. That's what happens this time of the year with the subtropical ridge over Bermuda. It takes all of this with the easterly wind and makes it go west. Makes for some beautiful sunsets, but it also is an indicator of stability, stable air in the atmosphere across the tropics. And we've got that right now for the most part. The only thing that the guidance is latched onto is Invest 94L, which isn't anything right now. What's interesting is some of the energy that's just coming off the coast here is what goes into potentially firing this up to a low pressure system as we work our way toward the weekend. So we'll see. It's not going to bother any land. We think it's going to stay over the ocean and then gradually turn toward the north. It may become a subtropical storm. We have a tropical storm, Calvin, 45 miles per hour here. It is continuing to work its way west, about 725 miles to the south of the southern tip of Baja, which is up here, Cabo San Lucas. It is forecast to become a hurricane by the time we get into Friday morning, but the good news is it's staying over open water, and once we get past, about 120 degrees here, we start to get into the colder water, and then things begin to cool off a little bit. So 50% or better across the north. I think that was supposed to be in the other position, but either way, our 7-day development area, I mentioned the low is going to come south, develop, and move on to the north. I think I would hedge my bets toward this developing more toward the weekend than I would, let's say, the next couple of days.
Tropical activity is keeping some beach communities from hitting the snooze button. In the Atlantic, there is an area of disturbed weather, reminding ocean lovers that the tropics can heat up at any moment. And that is true. We have an invest to watch in the North Atlantic. But also, on the Pacific side of things, there is a hurricane, if you haven't heard, and that is Hurricane Calvin, moving away, thankfully, from Mexico and North America, but maybe on a path that is going to bring it close, whatever's left of it, toward Hawaii. We'll be watching that very carefully. 75-mile-per-hour hurricane right now, strengthening. The official forecast does bring it up to a 90-mile-per-hour hurricane, and then weakening the farther west it goes over cooler and cooler waters. But look, here's Hawaii, and we'll be watching to see what shape Calvin is in by the time of the middle of next week. It is in that general vicinity, but it will be weakening along that path at the end, but still it could bring some unsettled weather, maybe to parts of the islands. Now, what about on the Atlantic side? As I mentioned, we're not dead here in the Atlantic. We've got an invest, that is Invest 94L. It's got that curious cloud pattern, more like a comma-shaped cloud pattern, the kind that you would see attending an extratropical cyclone. And you would be right if you thought that. This does have a 60% chance of becoming a sort of a hybrid storm, one that's assisted by the jet stream, but maybe have some thunderstorms to give it an extra kick. It will remain very likely in the distant Atlantic over waters that are relatively cool in the 70s. And under these atmospheric conditions, that will not cut it. Don't expect this to come, A, anywhere close to the U.S., and B, become anything stronger than pretty much what it is, an area of low pressure with some jet stream activity along for the ride.
We're seeing all this severe weather, and hurricane season started early, and now we do have subtropical storm Dawn to talk about. We'll get to Calvin in a minute. We have another area to watch. This is subtropical, and something gets called subtropical for several different reasons. Maybe it didn't start in the tropics. You have some sort of boundary associated with it. This storm is considered subtropical because it's embedded within an upper level trough, and it also has a large wind radius. That's another good indicator of a subtropical storm. We do have some dry air. You can see wrapping in on the south and west sides here because a lot of that moisture is off to the east. And the stable air is expected to continue to kind of entrain into the storm the next several days. And stable air is not what they want. They want lifting oomph air, right? And the sea surface temperatures also are going to decrease on this track too over the next couple of days. So although the environment is not conducive really for strengthening, it's also not hostile enough to give it significant weakening. So it stays in that like 45-mile-an-hour range all the way through our Wednesday. Now you can easily see, does anything jump out at you on this map? Anyone call out anything that they can see on this map? Here's a big high pressure right here. Okay, here is our system. There's a trough going off into Ireland in the UK. This is going to get steered by this trough. There's a clockwise flow around this, so that gets steered around, then just kind of hangs around, because you need something to push it. So when you have your big Bermuda high just sitting there, it just sits there and kind of spins, and so will anything that gets trapped in that flow. Now into Calvin real quick. We're at a Cat 2 hurricane. It looks pretty decent, actually, I got to say, with that eye. It is moving west at 16. It will continue to do so over the next several days, and as we head into the beginning of next week, Lynette, probably some clouds and a few showers here for the Hawaiian Islands.
Let's bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knapp, talk tropics. Now, let's start with Florida because it's been really hot there. We know that. Any relief, tropical relief coming their way to cool the temperatures down?
I don't think much in the next few days. Maybe a little bit of more rain tomorrow, but I think it's about 5 or 6 days from now when I'm good soaking.
It's a long wait, though.
Yeah, it is. So it's going to be a difficult weekend in South Florida because of that high pressure ridge sitting right overhead. Yes, there's this weak tropical wave coming up through Cuba and the Bahamas, and maybe that'll increase the moisture enough to have an uptick in the shower activity tomorrow. But for the time being, it's a weak steering flow, a lot of suppression of the thunderstorm activity. Only along the sea breeze fronts are we getting much, and then it's mostly interior thunderstorms. And look at how these heat index values have been affected by storms inland over Tamarack and Plantation, brought an outflow boundary to Fort Lauderdale. It sent the heat index down to 81, but look how quickly it rebounds. So you just don't get a break for very long. Any shower activity we can get would be helpful, but these advisories will remain in effect all weekend long. Heat index values again going way over 100 tomorrow and Sunday. We just don't have enough motion in the air to bring in any breeze of any kind, and there's just too much high pressure sitting overhead to get a lot of thunderstorm activity. Now, maybe this tropical wave will increase the thunderstorm activity a little bit tomorrow, so maybe we'll have more coverage tomorrow than we do today, but it's not a significant change in the pattern. Most of the moisture of that wave is going to stay out over the Bahamas. Now, this big tropical wave out here in the Atlantic, this is the one that I'm hopeful. Once we get rid of some of the fronts and low pressure systems up in the Northeast like this weekend and early next week, then this wave gets across the Atlantic, and look at middle part, late part of next week. A lot of moisture pooling overhead. So, Mike, maybe that will be the soaking and the breeziness out of the Southeast that we've been waiting for.
There's hope, at least at longer range here. All right, let's actually talk the storms that are out there. There's Don in the Atlantic. You're not that concerned about that. But in the Pacific, Calvin may be a concern.
Yeah, Calvin is now a really strong Category 3 hurricane. Got a lot stronger since yesterday than we thought it would. And even though it will weaken on its way to Hawaii, starting off as strong as it is, could last as a tropical storm, or at least tropical storm strength, all the way to Hawaii. So Don and Calvin couldn't be more different, right? Don's subtropical system way up in the northern Atlantic that has max winds of 45 miles an hour. It is sitting over mid to upper 70s water temperatures, but they're above average. So it's not in a deep tropical environment, and it is sitting just to the west of these big high pressure systems, and Don is going to go around a subtropical high pressure system and meander the Atlantic for a while, and it has all of this upper level troughing that is keeping the thunderstorm activity kind of lopsided. The max winds are far from the center. This is not a fully tropical kind of setup. So it's going to do this loop-de-loop, and about a week from now, it might be almost in the exact same place it is now. Watch how it goes around that subtropical high and ends up in about the same place a week from now. So we're going to be talking about Don for a while to come. Now, Calvin will be talking about for a while as well, up to 125 miles an hour on this latest advisory that just came out. A lot of cool water between Calvin and Hawaii. In fact, those waters are cooler than average. But it's got ridging to the north that will keep it going westward, and it will weaken, but look, it could get all the way to Hawaii, perhaps as a tropical storm. So it won't be a hurricane but it could bring maybe next Wednesday, Alex, some tropical storm force winds and heavy rain to Hawaii.
All right, a lot to watch over the weekend and into next week. Dr. Neb, thanks. Our coverage continues next on the Weather Channel.
That's right. Right up at the top of the hour, it is Storm Center at 5 o'clock. Thanks for being with us here on Weather Underground. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
Let's turn now to our daily check on the tropics.
Hurricane specialist and storm surge expert Michael Lowry is here to tell us about subtropical storm Don. Michael.
Hey, Nicole, already up to our 4th named storm in the Atlantic. We typically don't see that until middle part of August, so running a pretty quick pace here in terms of storms in the Atlantic. The good news, though, with Don is that it is smack dab in the middle of the central Atlantic. Here are the latest numbers from the National Hurricane Center. Winds at a modest 45 miles per hour. This is a subtropical system. That means most of the weather, the thunderstorms, the strong winds are removed from the center of circulation. A bit of a technical distinction, but nonetheless, we'll show you how this all happened. As you look at the forecast, over the next few days, this one's going to be moving toward cooler water, so we think that it's probably already peaked in strength. Now, if it does survive the weekend, there is a possibility this could re-strengthen as it moves back toward the south and toward warmer waters, but you can see staying well over the open waters and no threat to land. I do want to show you the water vapor picture, though, over the last 48 hours. Really impressive here. The atmosphere, the jet stream flexing its muscles. We see a big dip in the jet stream that scooped up this initially non-tropical area of low pressure. And once it got to the middle of that upper level area of low pressure, found enough of a cocoon and lighter winds aloft to transition into this subtropical system. Not very often, only once or twice a year we see this happen. So pretty neat to see it, and also nice to see it away from land. Across the wider Atlantic, we have a lot of dust and we have a lot of wind shear. This is very typical for July, and that's why July tends to be a quiet month, and that's what it looks like here in the week ahead. I don't see any problems for us as we go into round out, it looks like, July, I should say. So things quiet, at least in the near term, in our neck of the woods.
But if this can hold together, there might be a couple of heavy downpours overnight while most of us are sleeping. All right, let's change gears and talk about subtropical storm Don. So what is a subtropical storm? It's a hybrid between a tropical and extratropical storm. Tends to be less organized, more lopsided. The storms are away from the center and not toward that eye. It can have tropical storm force winds, but tends to have less rain, and there's no such thing as a subtropical hurricane. If a subtropical storm gets to hurricane status, it becomes a hurricane. I don't think that will happen with this system, certainly not over the next week. Winds are at 45, and you can see how it's lopsided. Notice where all of the cloud activity is. As we take a look at the future track, it's just going to sit here and spin around for the next 5 to 7 days, so no threat to the United States or to any land for the next week. Now, after next Wednesday, could it turn back toward us? Sure, but at this point, that's way too off in the distance, so we'll just say no worries for the next week. Let's talk about the dust. That batch of dust right here is coming south for the weekend. Notice the cutoff is right around Miami. So southern areas into the Keys, lower rain chances, more dust. Northern areas, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, all of Miami-Dade and Broward counties, higher rain chances because we have less dust. But that right there, that's next weekend. If this model is correct, next Saturday and Sunday, a week from now, we're going to have thick dust. Makes the sky that orange color. It definitely hurts our air quality, but it might wipe out the rain chances completely.
But during the day today, many areas picked up between 1 and 3 inches of rain, so we'll have to continue to be on the lookout for the street flooding worries over the start of the work week as well. This is not a worry, but in the distant Atlantic, this is subtropical system Don. There it is, 40-mile-per-hour winds expected to move in kind of a loop over the next several days, but only impacting the distant shipping lanes as we continue to track this subtropical system. The rest of the tropics look nice and quiet.
Good morning. Time is 5:11. Tracking the tropics. We are still tracking subtropical storm Don, but good news, it will just linger around this area, and then it will be a very weak post-tropical system in the next 24 hours. Everywhere else looking pretty quiet, all thanks to the Saharan dust off the coast of Africa that will be moving across the Atlantic Ocean and into South Florida. And we're talking about Friday and Saturday and possibly on Sunday as well. So that will make our allergies worse. Starting on Friday afternoon, we will see some hazy skies as well. Friday evening, and even Saturday morning and Saturday night, we'll see some hazy skies out there.
chance for showers and thunderstorms in the afternoon. Of course, the tropics, we are still looking at Don out there is now a tropical depression, a very strange thing out here because look at the proposed track, whoop, all the way around and coming back and may become a tropical storm again over the next few days. So it's something we're going to watch way out there, but no threat to anyone, no threat to land. Temperatures are going to stay very hot and steamy with a chance for storms every single day. Typical summer right here in South Florida.
Welcome back to Weather Underground. It's an El Nino year, and that raises the concern a little bit more for the Central Pacific being busy with tropical cyclones. And August is often the busiest month out near Hawaii, but we can have things start a little earlier. And we've got Calvin that used to be a major hurricane and will be passing near the Big Island tomorrow night into Wednesday morning as a borderline storm or depression. So tropical storm watch is up, but the biggest concern is going to be the risk of locally heavy rain for about a half a day and interacting with the complex terrain. The mountains will squeeze out extra moisture and the enhancement of the easterly trade, so flash flooding for the Big Island and Maui County is a big concern. 50-mile-an-hour tropical storm doesn't look like much because it isn't compared to what it was, but it's going to enhance the trade wind flow. You already got that high pressure to the north producing breezy trades, but this will enhance the pressure gradient on its north side, and the center is going to pass just to the south. Now, it's got cooler than average waters to keep the intensity in check, but this swirl is taking its time spinning down, and the northern side of it will be the windier, wetter side, and that's the part that's going to go over the Big Island and Maui County over this forecast track. So again, tomorrow night into early Wednesday will be the worst time as it continues to weaken as it goes off to the west. We've also got another system that could be forming on Calvin's heels over the next week. So even after Calvin, Hawaii's got to keep their feelers up for the potential for something else developing out there. And then we still have Don, which is now no longer subtropical. It's fully tropical, but still not fully impressive, right? It's a depression still meandering out there over the Atlantic. It'll make another loop around the high pressure lobes of the subtropical and tropical Atlantic. Maybe by next week, Mike, we can get rid of this one.
That would be nice, right? Wouldn't it? We've already had 4 named storms so far this season in the Atlantic Basin. Typically, we wouldn't get to our 4th named storm until the middle of August, so it's been pretty rapid progression of the season so far here in the Atlantic Basin. Next name on the list would be Emily, followed by Franklin. But then you take a look at this statistic, and I think this paints a different picture, right? Yes, we've had a lot of storms so far this season, but we haven't had a lot of activity, so to speak, when you look at the climatology. 94% of Atlantic Basin activity is still in front of us when August and September generally become very active months, and October can also be an incredibly active month. Now, this season, we may be looking at this battle between El Nino and then the warm sea surface temperatures, low wind shear environment. Typically speaking, El Nino will reduce the amount of activity that we see in the Atlantic Basin, especially the main development region. But I want to bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knapp, for a little bit more on this because, Dr. Knapp, you've been really interested in how this may all play out. 4 storms already. The forecast is for higher than average numbers of storms. What do you see maybe the next couple of weeks? You think things may change because we've been in a lull. You think things could get more active?
Yeah, there are signs that the Atlantic is going to gradually come back to life, which often happens between mid-July and mid-August anyway. But in an El Nino year, to have had Bret and Cindy out in the tropical Atlantic with weaker wind shear than you would usually expect in an El Nino year is a sign that we shouldn't expect this to be a typical quieter than average El Nino year. And the models are starting to hint at things changing. So again, it's these super warm waters out in the Atlantic, and down here in the tropical Atlantic, that's where they are the warmest. But Mike, we often look toward the Caribbean as being the area that's affected by the wind shear of El Nino, but not so much the tropical Atlantic. So you can see on the water vapor out by you, all that activity out in the East Pacific, and we've got strong westerly winds coming through the Caribbean. But you get out to the tropical Atlantic, it's starting to go the other way. Upper level high pressure, upper level easterlies, weak wind shear, and this tropical wave that is leaving the coast of Africa now, that's the one that the models start to really show an enhancement of the amplitude of that wave, and the models show possible development over the next week as you approach the Caribbean. But after that, maybe you run into more wind shear.
Do you feel like there are bigger question marks for this August and September than usual, or do you feel like things are really going to start to take off?
I think they're going to take off, but the big question mark is where. I think the Caribbean might be shut down by the wind shear of El Nino, but the tropical Atlantic could wake up earlier than usual.
We of course, will be on it here at the Weather Channel and keep you up to date.
Heat advisory is in play again tomorrow across South Florida. That does include Broward and Dade, so it could feel as though temperatures are 105 to up to 110 degrees. So the heat still will be with us, but similar to today, we should have a decent shot at getting some showers and storms to develop. So of course that helps to knock the edge off the heat as well. High temperatures in the forecast the next 3 days, not quite as hot as they have been, but either way, the humidity, that's what gets us every time when you factor that into the temperature. Let's get you the tropical update now. I will just mention that the National Hurricane Center is saying that Don is now a tropical storm churning over the north central Atlantic. So earlier it was a depression. Now it's a tropical storm. Not a worry because it stays out over the open waters. In the future, so to speak, we'll be tracking a tropical wave poised to roll off the west coast of Africa as that is making its way westward over the Atlantic. May have some drier air in its vicinity, but it's going to be monitored for development, especially into early next week as it starts to get a little closer to some of the eastern Caribbean islands. But as for right now, nothing out there for us to be concerned about. We're just watching everything.
And tomorrow we'll start to see the rain likely a little earlier and then around midday into the afternoon again. We're seeing those spotty storms as much of the action will be steered towards the west coast. In the tropics, Tropical Storm Don is meandering out there in the open waters of the Atlantic, moving southeast, eventually turning to the northwest, not a threat to us or to land. And we're going to watch this tropical wave that's set to move off the coast of Africa here over the next few days into early next week. Could be over the Lesser Antilles, but there's a lot of Saharan dust. That dry air is over the Atlantic, and actually you can see it is moving across our area into the weekend. So as soon as Thursday, especially Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, that means less rain and more heat. Highs will be possibly around 96 Saturday and Sunday. Woo, what a scorcher.
Let's check tropics. We do have Tropical Storm Don that's out in the middle of the North Atlantic. We're not worried about Don. One, it's going to stay far away from land, and two, it's going to go into the cool waters, the oblivion of the North Atlantic. So Don's not going to be anything that we remember. And behind it, nothing. All right. No new systems are expected to develop this week. So don't mean to be all gloom and doom with the heat, but the tropics are good news. So we get to share that bit with you.
So that's what we're watching out for come tomorrow. In the meantime, let's see what's happening in the tropics. Tropical Storm Don is still out there. It's over the Atlantic, the central Atlantic. It's not a threat. It's going to stay over those open waters. Tropical waves are on the maps, but so is that Saharan dust, the Saharan air layer making its presence known. And as it does so, it aids in inhibiting tropical cyclone development. We'll keep an eye on this wave farthest east over the Atlantic. Maybe that looks a little bit more interesting with time, but for now, there's nothing out there for us to worry about. Calvin?
And that is good news. Thanks a lot there, Betty.
We've got a couple of circles out there in the tropical world here, but let's look at real quick Don, if you're wondering, in the Atlantic side, and let's get to that area to watch. So Don is not going to be bothering, I don't think, anybody, maybe fishing lanes, and perhaps eventually Europe as it moves kind of in a path like this, but not really getting any stronger than it is right now. You know, 60-ish miles per hour is a tropical storm, and then weakening as it moves over the even cooler waters of the North Atlantic. So let's say goodbye to Don. But let's talk about what's going on in the Atlantic. We have a Saharan air layer outbreak, normal for this time of year. And in fact, it's actually been less dusty than average overall over the tropical Atlantic this year. But, you know, you're not going to get a tropical cyclone spinning up in the middle of a SAL outbreak. That's just not going to happen. So what do we do then? Well, sometimes on the edges of these Saharan air layers, those dry and dusty plumes of air that come from Africa, sometimes on the edges, you can get cloud development and thunderstorm development. Lo and behold, we have sort of this area here in the eastern Atlantic that bears watching. It's not particularly well organized right now, and it's apparent that there may be a couple of features within that broader region that need to be monitored. And overall, Hurricane Center's going with a 20% chance of development here. Now the question is, what is here? Is it the 20% chance associated with that cloud cluster, or is it perhaps maybe an increased opportunity with a bit of a circulation at low levels right here out of that same zone? So which is it? Oh, I'm not really sure, but I can tell you that the European Center's forecast guidance over the tropics indeed does have probabilities, and some significant, that we will get a tropical cyclone developing out of this in just a matter of days. Jen, something to watch.
Quick check of the tropics here. We have a hurricane on the map. This is Don, but it's just about to go out into the oblivion of the North Atlantic and fall apart. The odds of the disturbance in the Atlantic down a little bit today at 60% of developing into Tropical Depression 6. Look at this thing, just kind of went poof on satellite. Nonetheless, it will probably still be able to attain tropical depression status, most likely as it moves toward the eastern Caribbean islands. That would be by Tuesday or so of next week. After that, once it gets into the Caribbean, hostile upper level winds should keep it from being much of a threat thereafter. We'll still keep an eye on it, but at this point it doesn't look like a big threat. Eden?
Looking good tonight, Hurricane Don, our first hurricane of the season, and Don won't stay a hurricane for very long. In fact, by Monday, it will be a post-tropical cyclone over the very colder waters of the North Atlantic. But this is what we're keeping a closer eye on. It's a little disturbance, hard to even make out on the satellite imagery. Located in the central Atlantic, it's pushing to the west, a 50% chance of development, and the spaghetti models have it moving pretty much due west and then perhaps a turn to the south. We have a long time to watch this for you. We will, and we'll let you know if we see any significant changes anytime soon.
Heavy downpours, frequent lightning eventually coming to an end shortly after about 7, 8 o'clock this evening. Across the tropics, we are still tracking Tropical Storm Don. This actually briefly became a hurricane yesterday, marking the first hurricane of the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. We're still tracking this particular cluster of thunderstorms. It's encountering some drier air at the moment, so it really doesn't look like much, and because of that, the National Hurricane Center has actually backed off on development chances. It's now down to just a 40% chance of becoming a tropical depression or storm over the next 7 days as it works its way and approaches the Lesser Antilles. Notice our model plots here, something interesting. Notice how a few of them do cut off before they reach the Lesser Antilles, and some of them as they enter into the Caribbean. They're now beginning to pick up on some dry air and wind shear that this system is going to be encountering, which should then keep it weak. With that, we've seen those development chances again back off because the environment really doesn't look overly favorable as especially it enters into the Caribbean. Regardless, this system looks like it's going to be taking more of a southerly track anyway. It's not a concern to us in South Florida, so some good news there. Next 7 days, highs today near 97 degrees. We're at 96 for tomorrow. We see those rain chances increase and temperatures decrease slightly with highs back down into the lower 90s by this upcoming Wednesday.
Fox Weather is your Hurricane HQ. Don, which briefly became the first hurricane of the Atlantic Basin hurricane season over the weekend, that's no more. It found its way out into the cooler waters of the North Atlantic. No more issues with that. A storm that spent time as a subtropical system, a tropical storm, and again, our first hurricane. We've said goodbye to that one, but there's a couple additional areas of interest across the basin, one of which is brand new as of this afternoon. We'll get there in just a second. We do want to tell you about Invest 95L, which had a moment here where it was looking likely that this was at least going to become a tropical depression with a well-defined low-level center of circulation, convection, or showers and thunderstorms wrapping all the way around that. Needs to have that structure to meet the criteria of a tropical system. It didn't get there. It hasn't yet, at least, and it's just a low chance now, 20% over the next couple days, as it does bring some disturbed weather through the Lesser Antilles, the Eastern Caribbean. Eventually, it gets shredded by some wind shear, and that'll do it for 95L. This is the new disturbance that the National Hurricane Center just mentioned that they were watching through this afternoon. We are too here at Fox Weather. Low probability in the short term, but over the next week or so, as it rounds the base of an area of high pressure, it gets close to the southeastern coastline, and it's got a tiny chance of developing into something tropical. In between now and then, a lot of wind shear to deal with, but there is going to be longer range, perhaps just this tiny pocket where conditions could become more favorable for this to develop into a tropical system. We're going to have to watch this closely. High confidence with the track of this because that area of high pressure is what's doing the steering. It'll turn off to the west and eventually the north with time. Let's take things overseas now to Greece, where a wildfire on the resort island of Rhodes is forcing thousands of tourists and natives to evacuate. Officials say that strong winds and intense heat are fueling the massive wildfires there. This has been the country's largest evacuation effort in recent years. The Prime Minister of Greece told Parliament that the country is, quote, at war with the wildfire, saying that everyone needs to be on high alert. Temperatures in the region have